Hi everybody, thanks for coming to another live sheep farm event. I know today we're going to be going through some research, deep research that I did on the ashes. I've typed it all up and I said Adam could present it mainly, so he'll do most of the talking, but I'll just steer him in the right direction. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming everybody. Hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all the staff and that for letting us do these type of things, because it's very difficult to find places to host these kind of things. And Jim here doing all the sound. I don't know if he came last year, but you'll realise the sound's improved a lot from last year. We bought a few bits, new equipment and what have you, and rent an audio engineer. Yeah, Jim actually used to, me and him used to have a recording studio together back in the 90s and early 2000s. So we've known each other quite a while.
Used to play gay clubs.
Yeah, only in the toilets. Yeah, so today we're going to be presenting, I don't know if anybody's watched the presentation we did with Mike Williams. Did anyone watch that? No? Yeah? I'm going to be putting it on our YouTube channel at some point. But Mike, we're very interested in some of the research we've been doing on Jane Asher and the Elliott family. I don't know how much of it we're going to get through today. We've got about an hour and a half to do this in, so hopefully we'll get through a lot of it. But we're going to be presenting this on a Huxley-type presentation going forward. And my friend, our mate, Matt Sergiu, is going to be linking some of his research into it as well. And we've been coming across some odd things even after the research finishes, like this guy here called William Sargent. I don't know if you can see that book. It's an old book, this probably about 50-year-old. It's called The Mind Possessed by William Sargent, and it's about cult possessions. And he trained Dr. Richard Asher, and he worked for MI6 and went to America and worked with Ewan Cameron to bring MK Ultra back to the UK. And some of the, well, quite. I don't really want to read this, to be honest with you, because it was quite scary, but anyway, I will end up reading it. But one of the pictures at the back showed a screaming fan at the Beatles concert, and the wording they put underneath was, Beatles possessed. So on the picture, and I'll show it you if you come around. It's too small to show on this. I only got that yesterday, I only found that yesterday. But is William Sargent the sergeant from Sergeant Pepper? My wife picked that one up. She said, yeah, and what does pepper mean? That's what she said as well. But anyway, so there's loads of stuff just keep opening up with this type of research that Chris does. Anyway, it's good to see you all. See, we're getting some sandwiches delivered. Hello. Pints poured. Right. Hopefully this is going to work. So there are several things that I noticed through the research, and it's not just bloodlines either. I know Sean here talks about a lot of this stuff as well, so I know he'll be hopefully nodding his head through some of this. Evidence of extreme trauma, childhood trauma mainly, whether it be physical, sexual abuse, even financial, or some other kind of trauma. Nepotism, so you follow the career guides through their lives, and then study the career guides. A lot of people ask me how I do my research, or Chris does his research. You follow the people who are linked to them. That's how I came across William Sargent. He actually worked at St Thomas's, which is where Boris Johnson went in 2020 for reprogramming. If you remember, he supposedly got COVID in 2020 and come out looking like he'd been electrocuted. So that's where he spent his time, that's where Asher were trained. So you look for the career guides. Also, a lot of ideologies seem to run through a lot of these people, or families, or groups, like eugenics and things like that, or they're in cults and things. There's always the links back to intelligence agencies. There's the numbers and symbology. It's not my strong point, all that stuff, but even I can see that. The number 57, or 1957, has appeared a lot in this research for some strange reason. I can't work out, maybe we've seen the signs of the Matrix or whatever it is. Ties to secret societies, satanic groups, Masonic memberships. We're going to see a lot of Masonic memberships through this research. There's links to the Elliot family. They don't just have, they're not just Masons, they have their own lodges. Yeah. And then obviously we come to the bloodlines, royal and ancient or elite bloodlines. And this sort of proves the silly link, coincidental, whatever you want to call it. Too many things that link to be a coincidence. Jane Asher has a bloodline that goes back to Edward III. So does Lewis Carroll. And Jane Asher was in a presentation in the 50s. I think she was about 8 or 10 or something like that, between that age, looking through the glass, and she played Alice in this presentation, which was a recorded in the studio. It weren't a film or anything. I thought it was a film at first, but it wasn't. But she did play. She was in a 1980s production of Alice in Wonderland as well. But Lewis Carroll shares the same bloodline, which I found quite interesting. And you found something out about the guy that produced this film as well, didn't you?
Well, it was the fact he produced this, and then he went on to be a radio producer and a bookseller and a book publisher. And the first book he published was a set of prints by Eric Gill, who was the guy who put the statue outside the BBC. And he actually used one of his prints for the logo for his publishing company. So I just thought it was weird. And when you look at this guy who we went to school with, Oxford, they all just seem a little bit creepy. One of them, what's his name? John Benchterman, was taught by T.S. Eliot, and then he went on to another school and taught by C.S. Lewis. Sorry?
T.S. Eliot is actually a cousin of Jane Asher's. Yeah, so Jane Asher, her mother's maiden name was Eliot, Margaret Eliot, and T.S. Eliot this is in the presentation later on, they're actually related to the Asher family via that line as well. That's why this strange stuff, I mean, Lorraine will nod her head at this kind of thing as well. You find these weird links to these people. And also C.S. Lewis, the reason C.S. Lewis keeps coming up, he died on the same day as Aldous Huxley in 1963. So Aldous Huxley, C.S. Lewis, JFK. And C.S. Lewis, a strange story about him with a lady called Jill Raymond, who was evacuated out of London with her two sisters, I think they were sisters, and moved into a house with C.S. Lewis when she was 14, 16, and C.S. Lewis happened to be her hero, and she didn't know it was him until she moved in with him. And he funded her through school, etc. It's a whole strange story, going to come out in one of the Huxley presentations about C.S. Lewis. And he was a dark occultist as well. Along with, it was his best mate, Tolkien. They were best friends, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. So, yeah, there's a lot of these intertwined families there. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted.
That's weird. No, that was it really. I was just going to mention Eric Gill while we were doing this, the guy who did the BBC, blah, blah, blah. He found out that he did all the monuments for a lot of monuments for the World War I, World War II. So when they're celebrating the murder of all those soldiers, Eric Gill, the paedophile, was the one who designed the obelisks and the cross. And one of them's in Trumpeton, where I live, like literally 10 minutes from my house. Weird.
And they were all apparently built over what?
No, not all of them.
Right.
After that, someone sent me an Instagram, and it was a lot of those war memorials are built on natural springs. I didn't know that. So is there some like energetic reason why they've taken over that area where everyone would get supplied by water? And it's they've covered up these natural springs with the war memorial, celebrating killing a load of innocent people. I mean, sorry, commemorating on VE Day.
Did you see this video last year? I've played it a few times. For me, it's a video that sums up how deep I hate calling them elites. Twats, yeah. The state or the power controlling entity or whatever it is seems to pick out whether by design, i.e. matrix coding, or that there's people sat around the table saying these people have got to be in power, positions of power, whatever it is. This 1937 video, or a eugenics video that was about half an hour long, showing how they choose people to be in positions like the film industry, radio, and things like that. And the reason I've included this is because obviously when you look at the Beatles then, or anybody in the industry of cultural change, they're obviously doing the same with them as well.
What is the bearing of the laws of heredity upon human affairs? Eugenics provides the answer, so far as this is known. Eugenics seeks to apply the known laws of heredity so as to prevent the degeneration of the race and improve its inborn qualities.
Here is a man who, although normal, comes from a mentally defective family. Here is his wife, who is also normal. They have had 17 children. Let us examine the pedigree of these children. 5 of them died in infancy. 3 are still too young for an opinion to be formed of their mental state, a boy and 2 girls. Only 2 of the remaining children are normal, a man and a girl. The remaining 7 children are all mental defectives, marked on the pedigree in black. Of these, 2 live at home, a man and a crippled dwarf girl. There is 1 man in an institution and a woman with the mentality of a child. The other 3 are all girls and are all in an institution. How has this disastrous state of affairs come about? If we examine the pedigree of this family, we find that although the father and mother of the youngest generation are both normal, the father's brother was insane. Their mother was normal, but the father, the grandfather of the youngest generation, was defective, and his 2 brothers insane. Another famous family is that of the Terrys. All the individuals drawn in light colour on this pedigree possess exceptional talents for the stage, music, and art. Dame Ellen Terry, the great actress, was one of the most outstanding members of this family. Here is her portrait as Lady Macbeth, which is now in the Tate Gallery. Beside it stands her daughter, Edith Craig, who is an actress and an expert in historical stage costume, and well known as a producer of stage plays and pageants. Her brother, Gordon Craig, is recognized both in England and abroad as a genius who has been a notable pioneer in modern stage design and lighting. His son, Edward Carrick, is a stage designer and artist. Now let us see some of the other well-known members of this family. Ellen Terry's brother, Fred Terry, the famous actor, married Julia Nielsen, an actress and singer. Their daughter, Phyllis Nielsen Terry, is a distinguished actress with a beautiful singing voice. Her brother, the late Dennis Nielsen Terry, had a distinguished career in the theatre, and his daughter, Hazel, is now at the beginning of her career on the films. Ellen Terry's elder sister, Kate, was, before her marriage, an even more distinguished actress than Dame Ellen Terry. One of her daughters is Mabel Terry Lewis, the actress, and another daughter, Kate, married Frank Gilgood, a fine amateur pianist. Of their children, Val is dramatic producer at the BBC, and John is perhaps our leading romantic actor. And so, if we want to maintain the race at a high level, physically and mentally, everybody sound in body and mind should marry and have enough children to perpetuate their stock and carry on the race.
So we can hear the language there. I mean, I know it's 1937, it's 100 years ago, and they did talk slightly different, but you've got to put it in context of the time. They were obviously mapping out people to choose for these important roles within TV, whatever, fame. And it probably the same happened in business, and anything else that needed control over the Goyim. Julian Huxley, you've probably heard in the Huxley stuff, just sidetrack a little bit, he started up UNESCO, which basically has carved up the world's important lands as well. He was one of the founders of that, along with Prince Philip, Prince Bertrand of the Netherlands, who all of these were also Bilderbergers, etc. So yeah, and I think that the next thing we're going to talk about sort of ties in with all of these things. Oh, just a second. Sir Julian Huxley, I nearly forgot this. He wrote a book called, he founded Technocracy and wrote a book called New Bottles for New Wine in 1957. So again, all through this research, you'll see that the Ashers lived in number 57 Wimpole Street. Richard Asher died at 57. He wrote the Mental Health Act in 1957. A lot of things were happening in 1957 around this family. Don't ask me why, not my world. Somebody else cleverer than me, like Chris will sort it out.
Definitely cleverer.
Yeah. So, Chatham House. The Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, is obviously a British think tank that was at the centre of 2020 as well. It's said to help governments and societies build substantially secure, prosperous and better world, or just world. It was also known as Tavistock of the human relations as well. And the originator of the Tavistock rule, we spoke about that before, but the reason I'm talking about that is because Prime Minister William Pitt was the Earl of Chatham, and that house there is where he lived. He was the first Earl of Chatham, and he's also related to Jane Asher via the Elliot bloodline. So that's his first link to, I suppose, to Tavistock. I'm not saying it's a link that means they were in Tavistock, but there's a bloodline link to via Edward James Elliot, who was a direct ancestor of Margaret Elliot. And there's William Pitt. Nice wig, might get one. So I thought I'll look into who funds Chatham House. Roche Pharmaceuticals from Chatham House, just as a little side note. These two lovely gentlemen, Luke Hoffman, who's passed away now. Yeah, nice brows, Denny Seeley brows. And I get a rogue Denny Seeley antler growing sometimes.
Not like that.
Yeah, no, not like that, no, but I have to pluck it out every now and again.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I know. Talking about ear hair and eye hair and stuff, yeah. I'm sure they've all come here to talk about my follicles. Yeah.
Lack of.
Yeah, lack of, yeah. So Andre Hoffman, he was on the board of the World Economic Forum, just showing the links that these people have, and they fund it via an operation called the Marva Foundation. Yeah, and they founded, Luke Hoffman was part of the World Wildlife Fund as well, which Sir Julian Huxley founded, along with Prince Philip, as well. So where they lived there from 1957. There's that number again. And like Harley Street, Wimpole Street is part of the medical fraternity within London. And we'll find that Wimpole Street, number 1 Wimpole Street, is the Royal Society of Medicine. And in, I think it was 1957 again, Dr. William Sargent and Dr. Ewan Cameron did a lecture at the Royal Society of Medicine on psychology, the same year that the Ashers moved into Wimpole Street. And he trained Dr. Asher. I would bet money that Asher was there at that meeting. I would bet money on that. But anyway, can't prove that. So this is the Wimpole estate, and this is where Wimpole Street was bought. When I did this part of the research, you've been there, haven't you, Chris?
Yeah, I've been there. It's near where I live. It's one of those where you can just go and look around the grounds. Maybe I'll go back with a camera.
Yeah. But the Earls of Oxford that own this building are actually related to the Elliot family directly. So the people that built Wimpole Street that Jane Asher ended up living on and Paul McCartney ended up living there, they were built by Jane Asher's ancestors. I wonder if they know all this. What, does anybody think they know all this stuff? I think some of them do. I don't know if all of them do, but I don't know. How many links do you need that, you know, the road that they've moved into, their ancestors built the damn thing. So they built, it was the Harley family that owned this building here, and they built Harley Street, obviously. They built Wimpole Street, they built Oxford Street, they built Cambridge Street in London. So these were quite heavy hitters, I would have thought. And if you look at, obviously, some of this stuff from above, you'd say, I would have thought, I have not done it, but I bet there's some, but they all look like owls and stuff. So the Earls of Oxford, let me get my notes here because this is a bit more in depth. These are the Harleian manuscripts. And the Harleian manuscripts contained a collection of 7,660 manuscripts, including 2,200 illuminated manuscripts. And the reason I'm saying this, I just want to understand the background of these places that are built and also the families that they're related to. So Jane Asher's family are directly related to this. But bear in mind that Jane Asher's family are earls as well. So I'm sure they were all crossing swords at some point in meetings and what have you. So I'd love to know what those illuminated manuscripts are. And they're in a closed museum, so you can't see them. And the British government at the time, I think it was in 1753, they paid £10,000 for them. Now, my rudimentary workings out with like capital interest, it works out about over 200 million. That would work out if they're buying them today. And that's a big bundle of money to buy in 1753, illuminated manuscripts. I bet Sean would love to get his hands on them. So would I. But it gives, apparently it maps out a lot of the Byzantine manuscripts and stuff like that, and Greek and other languages, maps out all the royal genealogies, Welsh genealogies and things like that across Europe. So it would be interesting to find out what they are. And the Welsh genealogies, we won't see it in this, but this is what got me onto this. Jane Asher has got genealogy all through the royal Welsh kings and stuff like that. Ancient, like way back into like single digits. Along with John Lennon, ironically. A lot of similar Welsh genealogy with John Lennon. So this is, just to give you some idea, this is John de Vere with his Beatles haircut, and his 15th Earl of Oxford and his Jane's 11th great-grandfather. So he was the esquire to the king's body when King Henry, I'm around here, King Henry I think died. He was esquire to King Henry VII. So he looked after the king's body when he died. So they're important people, you know, or important in the matrix, if you like. And he was Lord Chamberlain for life. So when you see Jane Asher, he didn't think that she was going to be related to all these people. And no, we don't, do we? We just accept them for who they are. And I'm not saying she's a bad person. I don't believe all these people are bad people. Some of them are being used, like we said at the beginning, in trauma. You know, they've been forced to do it for whatever reason. Threatened. Who knows? This was an interesting story. There was a fire at Wimpole Street. Number 27, 5 people died. And this kick-started the 999 number. A lot of things happening on Wimpole Street. So there were an Act of Parliament brought about this particular fire. So when we're ringing 999, it's because of this one fire on Wimpole Street. The Barretts of Wimpole. Anybody heard of a poet called Barrett? What was his first name? These are meant to be the most famous residents on Wimpole Street. Elizabeth Barrett, she was apparently one of the most famous poets in Britain. We'll come on to her in a bit. She lived at 50 Wimpole Street and married a guy called Robert Browning. Nobody heard of him? Nobody into poetry? I'm not either, but... he was an English playwright and poet, and these have got connections to the Beatles, John and Yoko especially, as well. And he worked with H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells was mentored by Thomas Huxley, the grandfather of Aldous Huxley, and obviously Aldous was Thomas's grandson, and H.G. Wells then mentored Aldous Huxley. So there was a play written about these two. The Barretts of Wimpole Street was called. You can see it there. And basically she was kept virtual prisoner by her father. This is meant to be based on a real story, whether it is or not, I don't know. But the video we played there was a film made in 1934 and one made in 1957 of all the years, played by John Gielgud. We saw John Gielgud mentioned in that eugenics video earlier on as well. So again, more links. But this is where it gets a little bit strange. So John and Yoko, John and Yoko, coincidentally, were big fans of the Barretts. Bear in mind, his bandmate friend is living at number 57 Wimpole Street, and these people live at Wimpole Street as well. I mean, it's a small world, isn't it? A lot of things happen in Wimpole Street. Wimpole Mews, Perfumo case, and all the stuff around that was in Wimpole Mews. A lot of things were happening around the same time in a very small area. I know Matt Sergio has done a lot of research into that Wimpole Mews thing that went on there in the Perfumo case. There's a lot of links back to this as well, which we're going to be doing a show on, the links back to this, with Dr. Sargent in the middle of it all, and some other leading psychologists as well. Anyway, they recorded a song, Grow Old With Me, which was one of the final songs written by John Lennon on July 5th, which is again 57, in Fairyland, Bermuda. The song was released on his Milk and Honey album, but the song was written about the Brownings, apparently, and it was inspired from two main sources. A poem by Robert Browning titled Rabbi Ben Ezra, and a song by Yoko called Let Me Count the Ways. Yoko said her song was inspired by Elizabeth Barrett, but the weird thing is, these two thought they might be reincarnations of the Barretts. That was strange, given the fact that people have said that Yoko might be a witch.
She literally made an album called I Am a Witch.
Did she? Yeah, that's my knowledge of it.
Creepy, kissy photo as well.
Yeah, it is, yeah. But she looks creepy anyway, doesn't she? In pictures I've seen of Elizabeth Barrett, she actually looks like her. Which is another odd coincidence. Yeah, maybe she was. So Margaret Asher.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she looks like she had an hard milk round. So Margaret was a musician and an English teacher, and her famous student was Sir George Martin. Did anybody know that? People know that? So she taught the guy that went on to produce all the Beatles songs, and then in 1963 Paul McCartney just happened to move into her house. Does that sort of ring alarm bells for anybody? Apparently George Martin as well, I don't know if you know this, Chris, with all your research that you did.
It's coming back to me.
Yeah, Jane Asher was in a Robin Hood film, and George Martin did the theme tune, you know, the Robin Hood, Robin. He wrote that, he produced that, and she was in the film. So all the way after he was at college with Margaret Asher at the Royal School of Music or something like that, was that? Anyway, it was the Royal School of Music. She taught him oboe. All the way through that, they've obviously kept in contact. Yeah, and he was actually pushing for Jane and Paul to be together. So it sort of encouraged them to go out together. So the story is that they met at a concert type of thing. You know, just luckily.
So you mentioned that Mike Williams. I don't know if anyone's listened to the new Mike Williams presentation, but he's done one with a 13-year-old girl who's bloody amazing. And she's bottomed down. Jane Asher was in 2 episodes of The Saint, and in one of the episodes, the story revolves around a guy getting in a car crash, and then he comes home with bandages on his head, and he shut up. And it turns out he's not the guy he's supposed to be with the bandages on his head. And I never knew that. She's in 2 episodes, and I think there's some numerology around it as well. But he's just released it 2 days ago. It's really interesting. So, and then also the car, because it was what's his name, Roger Moore. The car that the crash is in is the classic James Bond Aston Martin. Before he were even James Bond, there's a lot of strangeness around that as well. I'd recommend anyone listening to that.
Well, I mean, it won't be in this presentation, but the next one, Tara Brown, who that song was meant to be about. If you remember the song that they wrote about the car crash. I forget the name, I'm not a Beatles fan. Tara Brown is also related to Jane Asher. He's a direct cousin of Jane Asher's, but anyway, that's something else to go into in another one. But that can't be a coincidence that George Martin happened to be taught oboe by Margaret Asher, and then becomes Beatles producer the fifth Beatle. There's a lot of fifth Beatles.
Just immediately makes the whole natural production of the Beatles just bollocks, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
100%.
Immediately. You've got to start asking questions.
And that's only that one detail.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many details. I'm not on a Beatles aficionado or whatever it is. Get my teeth out.
I personally never liked them. Well, not liked them. I can appreciate the good songs, but I'd never bought an album, never play it, never listened to it.
Your mother-in-law does, though.
Yeah. Before we did the presentation with Mike Williams, I said to my mother-in-law, who's a massive Beatles fan, I said, we're doing a presentation with a guy talking about the Beatles conspiracy. And she's like, what's a conspiracy? I didn't go through the Paul is dead bit, and I just said that the Beatles were not an organic band, they were manufactured. And she said, well, I had Beatles wallpaper. And I went, yeah, but so that's irrelevant to them being an organic. But I had Beatles wallpaper when I was a kid. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I saw them on TV when I was. It doesn't matter. All right, you know what? Fuck it, forget it.
Christmas dinner will be nice.
Usually is.
Yeah. Usually interesting. Yeah. Port Eliot. That is the Eliot household in Port Eliot. The Earls of Eliot. The Earls of Saint Germain, actually. But Port Eliot's named after Margaret Eliot's family in Cornwall, and that's where they live. That's where they own. It's a 1,730-acre estate that's now owned by Prince William.
Everyone has anything else like that in the family, don't they?
Yeah. 700 hectares, 1,730 acres. Yeah. So that's Jane Asher's direct family. That's her, the Earls of Germain is her granddad, uncle, whatever now, still. So yeah. Edward Craggs Eliot, first Baron Eliot, born 8th of July, 1727, son of Richard Eliot, British diplomat. So these people, they were all, he was imprisoned actually by King Charles I. It's a 12th century house, these go back years. It's ancient family bloodlines, these people. Jane Asher just happens to meet Paul McCartney. Smelling some cows somewhere. So T.S. Eliot, I said we mentioned T.S. Eliot. There's a US and a Canadian arm and a European arm of the Eliot family. The Eliot family has a prominent American family. So they went to Massachusetts, and they were known as the Brahmin class, Boston Brahmin class, which were a banking elite in Massachusetts, around the area in Boston. And they are cousins of the Eliot family, of Margaret Eliot, and Jane Asher, from southern England. One of them is Samuel Eliot. He was an American banker and businessman, and he was probably the most prominent. He was the president of the Massachusetts Bank and a highly successful Boston merchant. They married into this family, German banking family. Are you going to say that, Chris? The Barenberg Goslar family. And some of their descendants can be seen here. This guy, Bernard Carinthius Paus. One of our cousins called Carinthius Paus. The Paus family.
No, Steve.
Yeah. And there's some of the symbology there that these guys have got. You see the goat and what have you. They were all Grandmaster Masons as well, these people. I mean, for some reason, all this stuff is just on Wikipedia. It wasn't like I needed to do any deep research on these people.
Because most people don't care for it.
You think? Yeah. A lot of these people. So Baron Johann van Baron whatever Goslar is a descendant of Jane Asher's, and he was known as John, and he was a German banker in Hamburg, owner of the Barenberg Bank in 1879. So he's a distant relation to Jane Asher and probably a direct cousin of Margaret Eliot. Yeah, and he married the granddaughter of Samuel Eliot, the banker in Boston. So I just want to list some of this guy's, Carinthius Paus's, which lodges he was honorary member of the Danish Order of Freemasons, the Icelandic Order of Freemasons, the Grand Land Lodge of Freemasons of Germany, the Supreme Council, Scottish Rite, Northern Jurisdiction, USA, and the Supreme Council, Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, USA. I'd say we're pretty high up. that along with lots of other ones, I'm not going to go into them, but so T.S. Eliot, we've mentioned him a few times. T.S. Eliot, he was part of the Council on Cultural Freedom, which was CIA funded in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and they were basically a company that produced magazines and books and things like that were all funded by the CIA. The CCF, it was called, and it was from 1950 to 1967. And he was a friend of Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell also has a direct bloodline to the Eliot family, but he introduced Paul McCartney to the problem with Vietnam, who then introduced John Lennon, and John Lennon started the peace movement. And he was a known, obviously intellectual, but I'm going to do a bit more on part 2 on Bertrand Russell. He's got a royal genealogy. Obviously he was a duke anyway, so he was a Duke of Tavistock. Duke of Bedford and Duke of Tavistock, Bertrand Russell. Can't make this shit up, can you? If you really wanted to, who writes the scripts?
Is it a script, or does it just unfold?
Is it just playing out in front of his eyes? So Bertrand Russell, I mean, Alan Watt talks about Bertrand Russell quite a lot. I'm going to have his wife, Alan Watt's wife on actually, at some point soon, Melissa. So that should be interesting. Talk about some of this stuff. But Bertrand Russell was at Wimpole Street quite a lot as well. And he was friendly with Dr. Richard Asher and Margaret Eliot. And he was Margaret Eliot's cousin.
There's some serious underground caves underneath that place.
So yeah. Come on to Richard Asher.
It's a forehead, isn't it?
Yeah, it's bigger than mine, that, and he's still got some hair. A lot's been said about Richard Asher and his death and stuff like that, and when you start scratching around, there's more to read into this. I just thought he was a doctor. He was a haematologist, and I just happened to look after a psychiatric ward for some reason. But then when you dig around a little bit deeper, you see that it was part of some kind of program. I mean, Mike were convinced he were part of an MK Ultra operation, wasn't he? Because Mike Williams, I don't know if anybody knows that Mike Williams is a clinical hypnotist, and a master hypnotist as Mike Williams, and he has been for 15 years. He's retired now. So when we read these papers out to him, he could see that you can't get that level of hypnosis in some of the stuff I'm going to read out in a minute unless they're in some kind of program. Because what he was saying was that hypnosis is only one tool in the box. You can't hypnotise somebody and then make them go and become a Manchurian candidate. You need drugs, electrocution, or whatever, some kind of other trauma to induce them to do these things. It's not just hypnosis. Everyone thinks you hypnotise somebody and they go do something. So that's not the case. So it was quite enlightening listening to Mike's side on that when I showed him these papers that Dr. Asher, that paper there on the side, he wrote a paper called Respectable Hypnosis, which is basically, and I'll if I've got a copy here, I'll read it out. It's basically Manchurian Candidate syndrome. He came up with Munchausen syndrome as well, which is a type of hypochondria. So bear in mind he's working in a psychiatric ward. How many people are going to come in with Munchausen syndrome, like hypochondria, unless they're being programmed with Munchausen syndrome? How many people had it in 2020?
So how old was hypnosis at this point? Was it still in its
they've been doing hypnosis for quite a while, haven't they, obviously? But you're talking here, this is a proper program, isn't it? These aren't just hypnosis. I'm going to read this paper out here from Respectable Hypnosis, written on February the 11th, 1956. He published a paper. if you read the paper, the whole paper, I mean, it's called The State of Hypnosis, and it just sounds like it's programming Manchurian candidates. This is a part of it anyway. I'm going to try and read it out. Some big words, bigger than my Salandine and Huddersfield education can handle sometimes. Under deep hypnosis, the subject automatically obeys any suggestions made by the hypnotist. For instance, if you suggest he cannot move, he's virtually paralysed. But if you suggest he can move, then he does so. If you suggest that he will obey only your requests, then others command him in vain. But if you suggest that he will obey other people, then he will be obedient to them. These phenomena, which can be induced under deep hypnosis, include paralysis, rigidity, anesthesia, automatic obedience, delusions, somnambulistic trance, don't know what that is, I'll read it out in a sec, and post-hypnotic suggestion and post-hypnotic amnesia. This is what they were experimenting in that hospital that was working, which was Middlesex Hospital in the 1950s and 1960s. So somnambulistic trance is where a person will walk, talk, or do complex actions while asleep. Under hypnosis, a patient can be requested to open his eyes, walk, talk, and in fact behave like a normal conscious person. So, I mean, we said after, were the Beatles not just a constructed band, but bear in mind that Paul McCartney, at the start of the Beatles, is living here, and he's reported that he worked on hypnosis with Margaret Asher and Dr. Richard Asher. You know, he's actually spoke about this stuff. And then he wakes up with the song Yesterday and another song as well in his head, and he couldn't understand where it had come from. I mean, it's right out of the MK Ultra playbook. Everything you read about MK Ultra or any of that stuff, that's right out of there, isn't it? This guy's doing this. And it reminded me of that guy, you know, the professor, James Giordano. Can you remember the video that I've played? I'm going to play it, actually. This guy, same haircut as me. Same barber, Mac 3, he's called, Scottish guy. Yeah, James Giordano, where he says he can basically make a population of hypochondriacs.
Moreover, we can induce a number of neuromicrobiological agents to then incur something called high morbidity. These are not necessarily mortal agents. We can modify the existing palette of bacteria and viruses through the use of gene editing techniques, very viable. This has been some of my ongoing work with my colleague Diane Diulis at National Defense University. And what we can also do is recognize that there are existing microbiologicals that can be harnessed to then induce the effects. We can also engage certain chemicals that way. What we want here is a morbidity factor, not necessarily a mortality factor. I want to make people sick. And what I do here is the virus is not necessarily the bug. The virus is what I put over the internet. Let me show you how I can crash a system pretty easily. I affect key individuals here, here, and here. And then I take another community in the back of the room. I affect key individuals there. And then I take another community. I affect key individuals there. And then I do what every good attributional group does. I beat my chest and take credit for it. And what I put out over the internet is, this is a virus, a bacteria, an agent that I have infiltrated into your fill in the blank. I say it's a weapon of mass destruction. And what I tell you it's going to do is it's going to produce paranoia, anxiety, and sleeplessness. What I've just done is I've recruited every paranoid hypochondriac to think that they have whatever that is. I've used salient and sentinel cases, and I create essentially a legion of what's known as the worried well.
You just summed it up in, I don't know. That's probably that programme 50 years further on. It's a nice place to stop that, isn't it? Looks friendly there, doesn't it? Yeah, so that type of research is 50 years on now from there, and that's what he's presenting there, that they can actually control people en masse. They don't need to experiment now on people one-to-one. They can basically do it over the internet, as he said, wherever that meant, through frequencies. Probably people have passed that down, this trauma, through generations as well. And now we're more susceptible to it, or the NPCs are more susceptible to it.
One of the theories is it was just a weaponized version of satanic mind control. We just weaponized it. It's just something that's gone on forever.
Yeah, I can go with that one. but we're mad. Yeah. So, has anybody looked into Dr. Asher's strange death? You'll have heard it mentioned a few times on what went on. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on that because it's something that has been talked about. But while he were going missing, and again, the Profumo case were all over as well, and all these people disappearing in that particular area. You know, the physio, Stephen something or other, I can't remember, in the Profumo case, Stephen Ward and all that, they're links to all these people that I mentioned, as well as Stephen Ward, because he was a physiotherapist, weren't he? And he was also linked to psychological treatment and what have you. So a lot of very strange links here. But did he die, or was he suicided? I would say that, given some of the information I found about this guy, William Sargent, it was known that Frank Olson came over to London to help William Sargent. Frank Olson was the guy that decided to take a load of LSD and jump out of a window in America and kill himself. Yeah, right, of course he did. But he was over here apparently, and he was having a gripe about the torture and programming they were doing on individuals. Probably signed his own death warrant there. But so he was working with these guys, was Frank Olson, and that's probably not heard about. And Dr. Asher actually went missing about 6 years earlier in 1963. So he'd been kicked out of his job for whatever reason, probably asking too many questions, and he'd left his several jobs that he had, important jobs, and started to work from home on Wimpole Street, right around the same time that Paul McCartney started seeing Jane Asher and moved in to the house. And he went missing. They couldn't find him. Nobody knows where he was. There's a story there, The Mystery of Dr. Asher, missing father of actress Jane Asher. So he was missing for a couple of weeks. And they used an excuse saying he went missing because of all the pressure of fans outside the house and things like that. And it basically sounds like he had a mental breakdown. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's not reported that he went missing about 7 or 8 years before he turned up dead in his...
And Mike also said that there were a push to get Jane Asher and Paul McCartney together.
Yeah, I said that earlier.
Oh,
yeah, yeah. Where have you been? You wrote it all.
I try not to listen to you.
So yeah. Anyway, I won't spend a right lot of time on Richard Asher, but I don't believe he committed suicide after going through what we've gone through. He disappeared for 2 weeks, and then they found him dead in the basement. Ironically, some of the songs that McCartney was said to have been learning was also in the same basement, and in the attic, but in the basement as well. So whatever that means.
How did they get away with that without investigating it more if he weren't missing? Surely someone would have checked his basement.
Well, of course they'd have checked his basement. I mean, possibly his wife might have done. He just nipped out for a paper for 2 weeks. So after Richard had died, I want to write an interesting book, this, but a lot of interesting people were supporting him, and these were some of his friends. And I'm wondering whether some of these people were working on the same programs that he was working on. It's not an interesting book. Don't rush out and buy it. It's basically all his papers that he's written in one book. So that respectable hypnosis and stuff like that. But Sir Francis Avery Jones, Lord Rosenheim, all these people, and when you look into their past, they're all working for the government, etc., etc. So I reckon you're seeing there some of his friends who were singing his praises were also working for the programme. So, Richard Asher helped write this policy here, the Royal Commission on the Law Relating to Mental Illness and the Mental Deficiency Act in 1957, which was brought into law in 1959. And he was working for the, it was also known as the Percy Commission. Now, if you've been listening to Mike Williams had a lady on there, I think she was called Stacey, might be wrong, and she worked out that Paul McCartney, if there is a second Paul McCartney, he was part of the Hamilton family, the Dukes of Hamilton in Scotland. And Percy, Elizabeth Percy, was Paul McCartney, Mark II's mother. And Richard Asher was working for the Percy Commission, who was part of that family. This guy here. And he's also a direct relation of Jane Asher. So Richard Asher was working on this commission with a cousin of Margaret Elliott's. You can't make this shit up, can you? If I wanted to make all this up, you couldn't make it up, could you? I wouldn't have the imagination to make it all up. Yeah. So it was the rewriting of how they were going to look after people who were mentally ill. And who better to write it than people who were working for MK Ultra? So he made a contribution to this, Richard Asher, and he wrote a memorandum entitled Mental Observation Wards, which reminded me of Ken Kesey. I don't know if you remember the story of Ken Kesey. He was at Stanford University, and he volunteered to be part of a veterans hospital, and he was then coerced into being part of MK Ultra and given LSD, and then he was the one that went round handing LSD out in the 1960s. Look, Ken Kesey, it's an interesting story. He was one peddling all the psychedelic drugs in the 60s in America. Well, he was one of the people doing it, not all of the drugs, but yeah. So he was working for Project MK Ultra in a veterans ward where they were basically torturing veterans. Nice people, aren't they, these, Jeff? Yeah. But Ken Kesey wrote One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. That was his fame, yeah.
In the book, it's not from Jack Nicholson's point of view. It's from the big Indian's point of view.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing is Ken Kesey's point of view.
Maybe.
So you were brain wiped in that. Right. Yeah. I'm guessing it is anyway.
Yeah, and also you could add the Frank Olsen story back into that as well. I think they made a Netflix.
Yeah, they did. Frank Olsen's family is still trying to
sue them.
Yeah, still trying to get.
Good luck there.
He was murdered.
Yeah, look at all these people who've been tapped to a ghost. They're not going anywhere, are they? Right. Anyway, so the Percy Commission. This is Jane Asher's links to the Hamilton family, which Mike got a bit excited about, didn't he? Elizabeth Asher, you'll see her there with a berry on, and that's her family line right back to King Charles, going that way across, I suppose, or that way if you're watching us. Yeah, so these people are direct relations to Jane Asher. So that's Jane Asher's bloodline to Sir Henry de Percy in 1273 through the Elliot, Granville Elliot line, all the way down. I haven't looked into Townsend before anybody asks if they're related to Pete Townsend, although I did do some rudimentary research with John Lennon, because he was related to the Barons of Fleetwood. I'm right there, I think. And then we've got Mick Fleetwood. His father was a wing commander for NATO. Again, you can't make this up, can you? But I don't know if he's related to John Lennon, but I would say if you went back far enough, the Fleetwood family would be from Fleetwood, which, yeah. So Mick Fleetwood's dad was a wing commander for NATO, and high up in the British. Now. So that, again, it's a bit like there's some of this research here. I found that the Elliots were related to Christa Berg, and I think Richard. This is called the Branson room, but Richard Branson's part of the Bergs as well, going back. So yeah, there's a few de Bergs, and she was also related to. This is where it goes a bit wacko. So the de Bergs. So you got Branson, who's got the Scarlet Lady. Christa Berg wrote The Lady in Red for Princess Diana, who's also related to Christa Berg. Yeah, so you can't make this shit up, like I keep saying. But anyway, that's Elizabeth's, the kings and queens she's related to. Quite a few of them. King Fulk of Jerusalem. I reckon he was buried in Jerusalem. King Fulk V. Quite an important guy. Apparently fell off his horse. They're also related to the St. Clair family. We were talking about them last night, weren't we? And the Rosalind Chapel. It's weird, you know, Tom Hanks, when I do, I'll reword that. when I went through Tom Hanks's genealogy, he's actually related to Dan Brown, or Dan Brown's got some sort of relation to him. Because Tom Hanks, when he does a lot of these films, he plays them with his cousins. Giamatti, is it called? Paul Giamatti in Shaving Ryan's Privates. I think Matt Damon's related to him. So a lot of these films, he plays people who he's related to or in with his cousins. So Tom Hanks played Disney. He's a distant grandson of Disney. He's related to that bloodline. He also played the guy, chat show host. He's related to him directly. But they didn't sell the film that he was related to him. It just came out afterwards.
Do you think you'd use it as publicity, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, you would. Like Tom Hanks, and he did actually look like Disney, didn't he? When he played
like
it.
the Cumberbatch story. That he's related to the Imitation Game.
Yeah.
They never used it in any publicity whatsoever.
No, none whatsoever. So the Sinclairs, Trudeau's part of the Sinclair bloodline as well, and they were part of the writing of the Scottish Rites of Freemasonry. So Trudeau's bloodline's off the charts as well. But when I got into Jane Asher's, she had someone in her family called Mathers, which got me onto Eminem. I don't know why it got me into Eminem, but it did. So I found out that Eminem obviously he's called Mathers, or Mather, and he's called Mathers, and they changed the name from Mather in the 1700s. And his distant relation was the one that brought the law in to burn people at the stake in Salem. So Eminem's bloodline, yeah. And then Dinsmore from the Doors, one of his great grandmas had somebody burnt at Salem by one of Eminem's. Anyway, it's weird, isn't it? That stuff. I find it amazing. Boring bastard and all, but I need to get a life. So the Percy Lodge. So Jane Asher's relations. This is one of the first ones I'm going to show. The Percy Lodge, 1427. So a lot of these earls and dukes and that actually have their own lodges. That's the 7th Duke of Northumberland. I mean, that's not just. I mean, Mason, so I can get off parking tickets and stuff. He was a provisional Grand Master of the province of Northumberland, and they also have several lodges. I think they had Alnwick Castle and stuff like this. Alnwick Lodge. There he is. Lovely chap, isn't he? Henry, what's that? Algernon George Percy, Earl Percy. Lord Warkworth. So I think there was a Warkworth Lodge. She's back. Hey up. We're finished. So who was Lord Warkworth? He was the Grand Warden of the United Grand Lodge of England. Again, these are direct relations of Jane Asher's. You know, we're not. He was working for a grandson of this guy, on the Percy Report. Wouldn't you love to know what was going on? Where they sat around a table and said, 50 years' time, we're going to have this band, and it's called the Beatles, and George Martin's going to be managing them. He just happens to play the oboe with the woman he's going to.
And in another few years, 2 knobheads are going to be talking about.
Yeah, two part breeds from Huddersfield are going to be talking about it. Does anybody know who this guy is? Yeah, well spotted. Yeah, it's Dominic Cummings as father-in-law, right? Sir Humphrey Wakefield, 2nd Baron.
The quality is everything, but in general, to be elitist, I think the quality climbs up the tree of life, and therefore, in general, high things in the tree of life have quality and have skills, and they get wonderful degrees at university, and if they marry each other, that gets them better again.
So you wouldn't have minded if one of your children had met someone from a lower socio-economic group who was intelligent and talented and...
Intelligence and talent is lovely, but I want parents and grandparents who've had hands-on success, running their battles well and proving they're wonderful, because one is the subject of one's genes, and I think I like the idea of them being successful genes and winning through to successful puppies.
Some things haven't been in genes though, have they? Like there's been some outstanding people and geniuses who've been like first generation.
No, they aren't. Very few first generation geniuses.
Very few, but there's still few.
Like which?
Would they have been allowed?
I think that's what
Of course there are.
You're saying very few.
Normally, you think of Bertrand Russell, for instance. Okay, ancient family, Dukes of Bedford, Wittgenstein, ancient family.
I like the contempt that they're looking at him with. I reckon 3 more glasses of wine and we're going to get his head stuffed in.
Don't pick on a Geordie bird. Yeah.
You could see the hatred in their eyes, couldn't you?
That big lad outside, he wanted to get him in an headlock, didn't he? Yeah. That's Dominic Cummings is another interesting character. I would say he's an intelligence asset, but that's another conversation. But that, I think, sums up how they think they're choosing the elite bloodlines to run the world. And I'm not even saying they're upper echelon, they're probably lower echelon people. But that's how it's like a management structure. They sort of manage the banking industry, or as we saw with Julian Huxley and that other video, the acting and actors and whatever industry.
Why did they have so much importance over actors and stage players? Because that was the ultimate propaganda tool at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah. But politics, I mean, obviously Cummings is married into that family, so, and he's behind the Boris Johnson and that nonsense that went on there. So the Earls of Germain, this is Jane Asher's family, as I mentioned earlier, and nice beard, that, innit? Can't you grow one of them? So they've got the Elliot Lodge, 1164. This is their direct lodge. There's no getting out of it. This is it. The Masonic Lodge of St Germain was consecrated on the 12th of June 1867, and the first worshipful master or chairman was Lord Elliot. That is be a great grandfather of Jane Asher's directly. Well, it is. I know it is. I've done the genealogy line. It's definite, and it goes right through up to the late 60s there, as we see. If you can read that at the bottom, 1967, and probably continued. And that's from 2019, is that? So, yeah. So who's controlling these people? They're also related to Clan Gordon, Dukes of Gordon, and Dukes of Lennox. I did some rudimentary research on Anne Lennox. Her ancestry goes back to the Dukes of Lennox as well. Although she hid it well in one of those BBC documentaries where they basically sold her as though she came from peasantry, which she did, in fairness to her. I'm not saying she came from a rich family, but her ancestry was hidden. It only went back to 1700, and we find it sometimes, don't we, Lorraine? A lot of this stuff is hidden, or they change the name and things like that, just to throw you off. Even just a letter that's different, just to throw you away, or a date of birth, something like that. But anyway, but it went on the BBC. Is it Who Do You Think You Are? Or yeah, it went on that anyway. They're also related to the Cornwallis family. They have their own Kent Freemasonic Lodge. Jane's great-grandfather was a Cornwallis. That's General Cornwallis, if you remember the film The Patriot, where he's got Mel Gibson's dogs in his fort, and Mel Gibson whistles them and they come out. Well, that was General Cornwallis. And Jane Asher, that was one of her great-grandfathers. Second Earl of Cornwallis. They also have the Cornwallis East Kent Freemason Society. So, and that's their logo there. Are they crows or ravens on there? That's their lodge. So the whole family's surrounded by Freemasons. Not just Freemasons, lodges. They own their own lodges, or have their own lodges named after them. Whatever that means. There's one of them. Fiennes Cornwallis, 3rd Baron Cornwallis. He was the, I think it was the deputy leader of the United Grand Lodge of England. that governed all the Masonic lodges in England, Wales, and Commonwealth of Nations. Lodge number 6599, named after him, Stanley Wycombe Lodge. And that's the Grand Lodge of England. You like them hooves, Chris?
They're looking a bit demonic there, aren't they? If you change the word Freemason to secret club, that's kind of a different ring to it, isn't it?
Yeah. So they're also related to, we're going to come into a little bit about another connection to the Beatles via a cousin of Jane Asher. They're related to the Lords of Enniskillen, and the De Villiers family, and both of these have their own lodges again, and the Villiers Lodge, and this guy. So we'll come towards the end. We'll have a few questions if you want at the end. Peregrine Nicholas Elliot. I think you were going to be called Peregrine, weren't you?
Wouldn't have been any worse than being called Christian in the middle of this bloody village.
No, yeah, true.
In the 80s.
Yeah. 10th Earl of Saint Germain. He just happened to be part of a company called Saltebe, who owned the rights to the Beatles merchandising. And he was a direct cousin of Jane Asher. Similar age. So I think you said on that podcast with Mike that it seems like the Ashers, or the Elliots, whatever we want to call it, were controlling the Beatles in the early days.
And he set up that Salty, which is Beatles backwards, in 1963. And didn't the Beatles get big in 64?
Well, it was right at the outset. 62, 63 was that area. I mean, it's not my world in that, but...
Well, in them days as well, they didn't have merchandise like they do now.
No.
So
but just strange. The fact that all of these things, so we've got Margaret Elliott teaching oboe to George Martin, Richard Asher being part of a MK Ultra programme, Paul McCartney living there and imagining he's written these songs that just happened to be old Italian songs as well. They were already pre-written songs. Anyway, there's so many coincidences going back to this family.
And they got the early merch shop.
And he got the early merch shop as well. Big Shill merch shop. I wonder if Beatles had Big Shill mics.
Right, should we take a break then?
We all ready for a break? Yeah. Ready for Mark? I don't know where he is, but...
I don't know. Thanks for listening, and I think Don went through my research fantastic. I hope you enjoyed my heavy research into the Ashers. But now it's Mr. Mark Devlin.
Thank you. Wow, straightforward and to the point, unlike the show. Yeah, we're running over a bit, so we probably should crack on. So apologies, because my presentation is full of Beatles stuff, so it's going to be kind of Beatles overload. The reason for that is because they're just such an interesting band to talk about, right? I mean, I could do a presentation on the Rolling Stones, I've got a thing or two to say about them, but they're just not as interesting as the Beatles, and you don't get all this amazing synchronistic stuff when it comes to that band. So unfortunately, more Beatles stuff it is, and a lot of the material is taken from my new book, which is now out. I think this time last year when I was here, I warned you that one day I was going to put out a book titled No One's Dad's a Plumber, and I've done it. So Thank you. So all that remains now is to fulfill my ambition of someday publishing a book titled "But What Do I Know? I'm Just a Fucking DJ." So that'll be coming next year. So let's get into it then. The most interesting band to study, the most influential and popular music group of all time, arguably, I would say. So this is the original lineup of the Beatles, and we're going back to the early 1960s here when they started out as a 5-piece before the lineup that we all know had got shaped. So we have John Lennon, Paul McCartney, the first one, we'll get to that. George Harrison. The original drummer was Pete Best, and the original bassist before McCartney took over was Stuart Sutcliffe. So we'll have a look at these. This is Stuart Sutcliffe, and here he is. He hails from a Scottish family, Scottish as in, you know, rites of Freemasonry, that sort of thing. And here he is flashing up a symbol which might be familiar to some of you. This is an occult method of signalling. It's one of the so-called Illuminati calling cards. And it's known as a triangle of manifestation. It's supposed to represent what occurs when you align your intent, your consciousness, with your thoughts, emotions, and actions, mind, body, spirit. So when those three elements are brought together within occult teachings, you can then manifest a scenario that you wish to bring into physicality. So young Stu here, who would have been about 20 or 21 years of age when this picture was taken, appeared to know what he was doing, because this is not a natural way to place your hands when you sit down, I would suggest. So the thing about Stuart Sutcliffe is he didn't last very long. He died at the ripe old age of 21 of a brain aneurysm. And there are various stories which circulate about this. His sister Pauline put out a book some decades ago, where she claims that Stuart was involved in a fracas, a fight, which erupted at one of the Beatles' gigs in Hamburg, and John Lennon evidently was getting the shit kicked out of him by a bunch of Germans, and Stuart steamed in to try and save him, and he got kicked in the head for his efforts, and she claims that's what led to the onset of the aneurysm that eventually killed him. There are other versions of the story, why would there not be? There are claims that Stuart Sutcliffe and John Lennon were secretly gay lovers. Who knows? Can't rule anything out, right? But either way, by 1962, Stuart was out of the way. He'd got engaged to an art student and a photographer named Astrid Kircher in Germany, and she was the one who took many of those famous pictures of the Beatles during their Hamburg years, including the ones on the abandoned rail tracks where the young McCartney looks very much like the one we have today. And that throws a bit of a spanner in the works when it comes to the idea of McCartney having been replaced. But I've spoken with Mike Williams about this, Sage of Quay, who's pretty much the authority on the whole McCartney replacement theory. And his view is that many of those early photos and that early video footage would have been doctored in recent times. And it's quite possible that McCartney back then was made to look more like the one we have today. Who knows? It's a total mindfuck either way, but we'll continue to return to it. So the original drummer, before Ringo was brought in, he was poached from the group Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. What happened? Oh, Pete Best, yeah. So this is the original Beatles drummer, Pete Best, and the shocking thing about him is he's still alive. Because when it comes to the Beatles' backstory, don't know if you've noticed, but the body count is rather high. And those who were involved in the Beatles' early years that are still around to tell the tale, should they ever feel compelled, are very few in number. We're talking, I mean, if you accept that the McCartney we have today is not the original McCartney, then we've got Ringo, we've got Yoko Ono. Is she in any fit state to tell anything or say anything? Probably not. You've got May Pang, who was John and Yoko's secretary, and she's the one that John Lennon had the affair with during his Lost Weekend period, with Yoko's blessing. Very understanding wife. And I'm starting to run out of names now. You've got Pete Best, and really not too many others. Everyone else is dead. But Pete Best is still out there somewhere. And he was kicked out of the Beatles in some very strange circumstances. So there was a guy that used to run around with the Beatles named Neil Aspinall. There were two sort of very trusted confidants of the group. There was Mel Evans, who was their roadie, and general assistant, and Neil Aspinall fulfilled pretty much the same role. And he was roughly the same age as the lads, so he was in his early 20s when they started out. Anyway, Mona Best, who was Pete Best's mum, ran a venue which she called the Casbah Coffee Club. And it's in the West Derby area of Liverpool. This is actually it. So these days it's been turned into an Airbnb where you can stay in one of the rooms named after one of the band members, minus Ringo, because this is before he joined. And it's the home, or was the home for a while, of Pete Best and his brother Rogue, known as Rogue, real name Vincent. Interesting thing about him is that Pete Best's mother actually gave the group their earliest gigs. So before they played in the Cavern Club in Liverpool, they performed in the basement of this place, the Casbah Coffee Club, and the roof of the venue was decorated with occult sigils designed by John Lennon, who would have been about 20 years of age back then. So it suggests that Lennon was already familiar with certain occult teachings. So Mona Best won a load of money on the horses, gambling, and she used it to finance this venue. So Neil Aspinall, this young lad that was running around with the Beatles, ended up impregnating Mona Best, Pete's mother. And the result was Rogue, the son, who's Pete's half-brother. Now, you might think this was quite an embarrassing affair, so they'd want to get rid of Neil Aspinall once word had got out of what happened. They didn't do that. They kept Neil Aspinall on, and they kicked Pete Best out of the band instead. 1962, they bring in Ringo Starr in the summer of 1962, and then in October, they have their first hit with Love Me Do, and Beatlemania is born. And by this point, Stuart Sutcliffe is gone, Paul McCartney's taken over bass, and they're a four-piece band. So for whatever reason, it was deemed more important to have Neil Aspinall knocking around than to keep Pete Best on. I mean, another version of how Pete came to be replaced by Ringo has it that in his day, he was a good-looking young lad, and the controllers of the Beatles were concerned that the girls were spending time looking at Pete on the drums when they wanted them looking at John, Paul and George. So they got rid of Pete, replaced him with Ringo, problem solved. So when it comes to Beatles drummers who may have been, you'll like this one. Yeah, I think I learnt this from you. So there was a time where it looked as if the role of drummer with the Beatles was going to go to this guy. You'll know him as Bodie from The Professionals back in the day, Lewis Collins, actor. He was also in the movie Who Dares Wins, portraying an SAS agent. And it turns out that he trained to become an SAS paratrooper himself. He came from the world of the military, came from the world of martial arts. He was very well trained in many martial arts disciplines. And he also auditioned for the role of James Bond. And he was turned down on the grounds that he appeared too aggressive. And he was also turned down for the SAS on the grounds that he was a public figure, his face was very well known, and therefore he didn't fulfill the requirement for anonymity that was required of those agents. But he was also a musician. He was in a Merseybeat band. He hailed from the Wirral, and in the early 60s he was part of a band, very much a part of the whole music scene coming out of that area, and there was a time where he looked like he was going to become the drummer for the Beatles before it went to Ringo. So just a strange aside there. So I mentioned this group is the most influential music group of all time, and you don't get to those kind of heights unless you've been hand-selected for the role, or unless you come from the right sort of family, or unless you have the right sort of affiliations. And it's long been suspected that the Beatles, or at least John and Paul, as the principal members of that group, would have come out of Freemasonic families, Freemasonic traditions. We could be getting handed the odd clue when it comes to some of their album sleeves. Clues to so much appear in album sleeves, if you know what you're looking for. So they put out a compilation album some years ago titled Past Masters, which is a term that comes out of Freemasonry. And then in 1982, there were these two famous compilation albums, the so-called Red and Blue albums. So the first one covered the period 1962 to 1966, and then the Blue album was 1967 to when the group split up in 1970. So you got them posing on this balcony here, a view from the ground up, and they're all in the same position, but by this point, if you buy the McCartney replacement theory, they've switched out Paul, and they've slyly slotted the new guy in. But either way, these albums indicate that there were two very distinct periods to the Beatles' career. So 1962, they first emerge singing all these nice boy meets girl love songs, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and that's reflected on this one. But by 1966, a switch has quite clearly occurred. And by 1967, the so-called Summer of Love, when the Sgt. Pepper album comes out, closely followed by Magical Mystery Tour, they've got into their trippy, psychedelic sort of phase, very experimental music. After 1966, they became a studio-only band, stopped touring, and they started experimenting with sonics, largely at the hands of their producer, Sir George Martin. So what's interesting about these albums is we've got a red album and a blue album. And when you get into the rites of Freemasonry, as in the Scottish rites and the York rites, you find that red and blue are very significant colours which figure within those traditions. So could that be another clue? If you don't like that one, how about this one? This, I'm told, is a Freemasonic handshake between John and Paul, and presumably the original Paul. Got any Freemasons in the house today? No one ever admits to that. Must be a few up here in Sheep Farm country. Okay, you're on the down low, right. So I'm told that is a Freemasonic handshake, and here's another one. And this is 1967, at the time of the Sgt. Pepper album. By this point, Paul would have been swapped out by William Shepherd, Billy Shears, call him what you will, if you buy the replacement theory. And here's another Masonic handshake. So is this indicating that as the two principal members of the group and the two most high-profile singer-songwriters of the 20th century, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, the reason for that level of success is because they come from Freemasonic backgrounds. So the hand signals are often a giveaway, and these elite types, or the assets of the elite ruling class, seem to like to broadcast their true nature in the form of these hand signals and stuff. And so for years and decades, they would have been doing this stuff, and nobody really knew what they were looking for. If you didn't come from those traditions yourself, and you didn't emanate from those kinds of families, you'd have no idea what these things meant. And you'd probably miss them. They'd just go straight into your subconscious mind. But how about this? When Paul McCartney, from some years ago, walked onto a Jonathan Ross chat show on BBC One, and when he sat down, he did something very strange with his hands. So we've got a screen cap of that here. Take a look, see what you think. Seems rather deliberate, doesn't it? And again, is that a natural thing to do with your hands? Probably not. So it's actually the same hand signal that Stuart Sutcliffe was doing in the 1960s, except he's holding it up higher and it's in reverse, but it basically means the same thing. And this becomes interesting as well. So going all the way back to the 60s, in the Beatles' first period, we've got McCartney, and this would be the original, biological James Paul McCartney, prior to the switch, which is said to have taken place on September 11th, 1966, 9/11/66. And here he is flashing up another occult symbol. I'm not going to do this one myself. I never do, because somebody's going to take a picture, stick it online, and say, I told you Devlin was a Satanist. So you'll just have to take my word for what it means. Here's McCartney demonstrating it anyway. It's the so-called 666 sign. It's another favoured way of occultists communicating with each other, and he's holding it over his eye as well. So this would indicate that the original Paul McCartney was also schooled in this kind of knowledge. When it comes to the idea of the replacement, I'll just leave you with this to ponder over. So the first picture is from September 1968. It's the video to Hey Jude. And then by January 1969, 3 months later, we got McCartney in Let It Be, the movie, the famous rooftop concert on the Apple HQ there in London. And he's got a full beard, his hair colour has changed, his eye colour has changed, his teeth have changed, his jawline has changed, his height has changed. But apart from that, it's spot on. Any questions? Here we have Billy, if that's who it is, posing in front of a poster which bears the name Billy. Right next to his shoulder is the word Billy. Is this a clue? There's plenty more. I've kept this one abridged in the interest of time. But how about this? a Wings album, which came out in the 1970s, Paul's band with Linda and Denny Lane. On this particular gatefold sleeve, limited edition of this album, the word substitute is scrawled over the photo. And the person that alerted me to this originally thought that somebody had written on it with Sharpie, and then he realised, rubbing it with his finger, that it's part of the print. So they deliberately put out a gatefold sleeve version of this album with the word substitute all across McCartney's chest. So are they trying to tell us something here? Favourite meme? Going back to Wings, that era, their famous album was Band on the Run, 1973, and the sleeve to this featured a bunch of very well-known personalities of the time, posing as if they're caught in a spotlight, like trying to escape from jail or something. So you've got Michael Parkinson, the chat show host there. There's Christopher Lee, the film star, we'll get to him. Denny Lane is on there. There's various others. James Coburn, the Hollywood actor, is at the back there. Coburn is actually doing the Baphomet pose. One arm up, one arm down, as above, so below. When you look at the Baphomet figure within Freemasonic and other occult traditions, that's what it's doing. Would that pose be by accident? There's a researcher in the States named Richard Balducci. Anyone come across his work? I've featured him on my show a couple of times. He also went on some shows with Mike Williams. Richard sits in a darkened basement 15 hours a day, researching stuff way beyond a level which can be deemed healthy, a bit like Dom. You should compare basement notes sometime. Yeah. And Richard just comes up with amazing stuff. He's got the most incredible mind, comes from having no life. But this is an observation from Richard Balducci based around that Wings Band on the Run sleeve. So he's talking about Ian Fleming, James Bond creator. He says Ian Fleming was inspired to create super spy James Bond 007 after listening to his step-cousin Christopher Lee's, so yes, Fleming and Christopher Lee were cousins, clandestine British military intelligence operations adventures. Lee's connections are why he is shown on the Band on the Run cover. Christopher Lee worked with and is here representing Charles Maxwell Knight, the British super spy known as M, who murdered Beatle James Paul McCartney with Maxwell's silver hammer. So this is Balducci's contention. There was a song titled Maxwell's Silver Hammer on the Abbey Road album. And according to Balducci, that represents mockery on the part of the Beatles of the public, because they're telling you what happened to the original James Paul McCartney. Again, this is according to him, it's not necessarily something I'm saying myself, but he says that Charles Maxwell Knight was the inspiration for M, James Bond's boss, in the Ian Fleming stories. We're getting into the realms of synchromystic connections here. And this is going to take up the bulk of the next part of the presentation, because there's so much of it when it comes to the Beatles. It certainly doesn't disappoint. We'll ease ourselves into it with some connections between John and Paul, which kind of cement a relationship between them. So both of them lost their mothers when they were teenagers. John Lennon was 17, and he'd just reconciled with his mother, Julia. His aunt Mimi raised him. So his father, Alfred Freddie Lennon, was a sailor. He was often away at sea. And for whatever reason, his mother felt that she couldn't do a good job of raising John. So she put him over to her sister, Aunt Mimi, and he famously grew up with her at her house on Menlove Avenue. What's in a name? So John reconciled with his mother, Julia, right before she got killed, when she was mown down in the street by an off-duty policeman. You couldn't make it up. He got off, naturally. No jail time, just a bit of a warning. Paul McCartney, meanwhile, lost his mother when he was 14 years of age, Mother Mary. She died of health complications related to cancer. So this is a link between these two founder members of the Beatles, you know, the trauma and the pain of having lost their mother at similar ages. But there's a bit more than that, because it turns out that both of them confessed to having felt sexual feelings towards their respective mothers in ways that are not necessarily appropriate. So In a tapped conversation, John Lennon recalled a moment when he and his mother, lying on the bed at the age of 14, he had his hand on his mother's breast, as he always thought he should do. And then the story goes on to say that Lennon wondered if he should go further. Thankfully, he didn't, apparently. And then Paul McCartney admitted that he was turned on by his mother when he was a teenage boy. So Paul said, at night there was one moment where she would pass our bedroom door in underwear, which was the only time I'd ever see that, and I used to get sexually aroused. Just a funny little bit. I mean, it never went beyond that, but I was quite proud of it. I thought, that's pretty good. It's not everyone's mum that's got the power to arouse. Yeah, nice family guy, Paul. Yeah. There you go. Fitted in well with the culture of the times. So we're starting to get into some of these amazing overlaps and connections. And there comes a point where I have to wonder whether all this stuff could possibly be the result of human planning. I know that social engineers working out of Tavistock and behavioural scientists and psychologists devise psyops, and they create scenes, they create culture, they create lifetime actors. Lord knows I've done enough research on it. But I do think there comes a point where it goes beyond all of that. And the only way this number of connections can be adequately explained is by questioning the true nature of this reality in the first place. So I've been doing this in my series of so-called God videos, which some of you might have seen. I started those in January of 24. I'm up to the 17th one now. To start with, they weren't everyone's cup of tea. Pissed a few people off, mainly Christians. But I'm getting to the point now where I'm getting a lot of support for them. And most of the comments now are saying, yes, these really seem to be tapping into a zeitgeist here, because so many people now seem to be questioning what this realm actually is, how it's constructed, what may have set it in place, to what end, what are we doing here, who or what even are we? And I've reached the point now where I think it can be adequately explained by using the analogy of computer coding, of the type that you would get with a software program or a virtual reality type computer game. So it runs on code. And I think that when you get down to the very core base of this reality, that's what it is. It's like a computer coded AI run simulation. And it's been left to just operate and tick along according to the coding. That's why things never really change in this world. You know, you might get a few moments of respite where things aren't quite as bad as they used to be, but the place has been set up to cultivate certain outcomes. And they're not outcomes which are necessarily beneficial to all of humankind. So for more on that, see my God videos. I won't dwell too much on it here, but I just wanted to preface this next section with that observation, because I think that's the only way you can explain how this insane number of correlations can occur. It's the coding arranging itself and expressing itself in certain ways, according to how it's been written. So we're back to Richard Balducci here. This is one of his observations. He loves all this stuff. He gets into astrology and numerology big time, very big on numbers. And the number 666 just keeps on cropping up, won't go away. The Beatles recorded the album version of their first hit, Love Me Do, on September 11th, there's that date again, 1962. And the period from this date to the cremation of Beatle John Winston Ono Lennon spans exactly 6,666 days. Bruce Kelly, who designed the Strawberry Fields Memorial in New York, close to the Dakota Building, to commemorate John Lennon, was born on the date of his subject's eventual death, December the 8th in 1948. It's one of just so many connections of this nature that we can make. So I want to draw attention to the number of parallels between the Beatles and the movie Rosemary's Baby, very special film, directed by Roman Polanski. Also Sharon Tate, the actress who was Roman Polanski's wife, and Charles Manson, who gets thrown into the whole mix. And we'll start out by considering the building in which the story of Rosemary's Baby was set. It was known in the film as the Bramford, but it was actually filmed, or the exterior shots were filmed at the Dakota Building on the edge of Central Park in New York, outside which John Lennon was assassinated on the night of December the 8th, 1980, which in UK time had clicked over to the 9th. I mean, there's one that I'd not even put into the presentation, but the insane amount of 9s that crop up in John Lennon's life. So he was born on the 9th of October, 1940. His son, Sean, who he had with Yoko, was born on his birthday, very same date, 9th of October. He lived at number 9 Newcastle Road in Liverpool. He had the song Revolution Number 9, also a solo record called Number 9 Dream, and it's just 9s everywhere you look. So the date on which he passed away, the 9th of December 1980 UK time, it occurred outside this building, and this is the parting shot of Rosemary's Baby as the film wraps up, and this is what it looks like. So with a bit of imagination, that could portray a departing soul leaving its body, I feel. And that shot was filmed right at the point where John Lennon was assassinated. We're told by Mark David Chapman, may or may not have been him, but whatever the case, I do accept that Lennon was gotten rid of on that particular date. And that just brings us into all these connections between Rosemary's Baby and everything else. So here's Mark Chapman. This is the guy who's said to have shot Lennon. He ticks all the boxes for having been an MK-Ultra assassin, Manchurian candidate, coming out of the CIA's MK-Ultra program. It's quite possible, I feel, that Chapman was programmed to believe that he had killed Lennon, because there are other accounts talking about who may have actually fired the bullets that night. And the blame mainly falls at the door of a former CIA assassin by the name of Jose Perdomo. There's some debate over whether he was the guy that pulled the trigger, but he's the prime candidate for it. But here's an interesting thing, because Chapman is pictured with his wife, who just happens to be Japanese, just like John Lennon. So John Lennon has a Japanese wife. Mark Chapman, his apparent assassin, also has a Japanese wife. I mean, that's just the start of it. So here's Roman Polanski, who is the director of that movie, Rosemary's Baby, and he's pictured with his wife, Sharon Tate, actress. She had a father who came out of the world of military intelligence. Hard to believe, I know. I'm glad we're all sitting down from the shock. He was a Lieutenant Colonel, Paul Tate. I've got a separate presentation which I first delivered at the Questioning History conference last year, titled Tate Manson, Real or the Cruelest Hoax? And in that, I'm presenting evidence, much of it gleaned from a researcher named Miles Mathis, because I happen to concur with a lot of what he's found, suggesting that the whole so-called Tate LaBianca murders, which are said to have occurred at the hands of Charles Manson's followers, disciples, in August of 1969, may not have actually occurred the way we're told they did. And I think it's quite possible, from photographic evidence that we can look at, that Sharon Tate herself never actually died in that event. There's reason to believe that the whole thing was a setup, with the complicity of military intelligence and with the usefulness of Hollywood film studios, who were right on the edge of where this is said to have happened, up in the Hollywood Hills there. Fake blood, props, actors could well have been used, and Sharon Tate could well have survived that whole event. That's personally what I feel happened. But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. We do a few of those, don't we? The odd tangent, yeah. So think yourself lucky Matt Sergio's not up here. He'll be here till bloody Monday. So yeah, this is Roman and Sharon. And here's the account of the event. So what's said to have happened is 5 followers of Charles Manson, this crazy cult leader, went up to Sharon's house, 10050 Cielo Drive, which has since been renumbered. The original house was knocked down and replaced by a new one, and the number there was 10066. What else would it be, right? And also there was a second address involved. Lino and Rosemary LaBianca are also said to have been murdered the same night or the following night, 9th of August 1969, by Charles Manson's followers. But most attention falls on the events of 8th of August 1969. Sharon Tate and 4 others are said to have been killed by 4 of Manson's associates. Interestingly, that date, the 8th of August 1969, when that event is said to have occurred, is the very date that this iconic picture of the Beatles crossing the zebra crossing there, which was used on the sleeve to the Abbey Road album, released later in 1969, was photographed. 8th of August 69. Very hot day. This is said to have been one of the clues that was offered pertaining to the replacement of McCartney, because according to interpretations of this picture, it represents a funeral procession. You got John Lennon in white at the front as the priest. Then you got Ringo in black, and he's a mourner, funeral mourner. You got George Harrison at the back dressed in denim. He's supposed to represent a grave digger. And then you got McCartney in a loose-fitting suit, and he's walking barefoot across the zebra crossing there. And he's supposed to represent a corpse, according to these interpretations. And McCartney, or wherever it is, has given his account of that day. And he's like, yeah, what happened was it was a hot day, you know, and I was wearing sandals, you know, like flip-flops, and I kicked them off and walked across the road barefoot. Because, of course, that's what you do, right? If it's a baking hot day and the asphalt is really, really hot, you're going to kick off your shoes and burn your feet, yeah? Yeah, stands to reason. So, according to many, this represents a clue as to McCartney having been replaced. I find it so interesting that the date occurred when those Tate Manson events were happening over in California. This is May 1968, and this is Ringo Starr meeting Roman Polanski at the Cannes Film Festival. So it's just another connection between Polanski and the Beatles. It showed that they knew each other, moved in the same circles, or at least Ringo did. And in 1969, Ringo himself starred in this film called The Magic Christian, alongside Peter Sellers. Very strange film, but it was Ringo's main acting role. And in the narrative of the film, there's a scene where a load of money is thrown into this huge vat said to contain pig's blood and pig manure. And a bunch of bankers jump into this mess to pick up the wads of notes. It's a statement about greed and capitalism and such, but it's one of the key scenes from the movie. And it's said to be, you know, pig excrement and pig blood. So the idea of pigs crops up here because there was a song which is credited to George Harrison, said to have written it, called Piggies, on the Beatles' White Album, which was released in 1968. That album becomes key to the whole story because it also contains the song Helter Skelter, said to have been written by Paul McCartney. And this is the record which is said to have inspired Charles Manson to want to go on his murderous rampage, or to send his followers on his murderous rampage. He's said to have believed that Helter Skelter represented an apocalyptic race war which was coming between whites and blacks, and he felt that the blacks would win that war and would come to control society for a period, but that they wouldn't be able to do a good job of it, and that everything would descend into chaos and turmoil. Meanwhile, he and his followers would have gone out to Death Valley in California and hidden out in an underground cave system there. And when society had totally descended into chaos, they would emerge, vanquish the blacks, and become the rightful leaders of society. That's the story we're given. We can ask ourselves how credible or plausible it is, but the name that he gave to this whole situation was Helter Skelter, and he's said to have interpreted hidden messages in that song placed there by McCartney. So it's just another connection between Manson, the Tate LaBianca murders, everything that happened in their wake, and that group coming from this particular album. This was released in November 1968, and those events happened in August of 69. We have another one, because one of the tracks on the White Album, it was a double album, there's a lot of tracks on it, was titled Sexy Sadie. And Sexy Sadie was a nickname that used to be given to Susan Atkins, who was one of the girls who went on that murderous rampage that night up at the Tate house there at CLO Drive. So the Beatles seemed to know that Sexy Sadie was the name of Susan Atkins, suggesting some sort of connection between themselves and Manson. Many of the songs to the White Album were written during the Beatles' retreat to India, where they studied transcendental meditation under the Maharishi there in February of '68. Also on that trip was the sister of Mia Farrow. Mia Farrow portrayed Rosemary in that movie, Rosemary's Baby. Her sister's name was Prudence, and she was the inspiration for the Beatles' song Dear Prudence, which appeared on the White Album. And the lyrics, Dear Prudence, won't you come out to play, refer to the fact that she apparently spent all her time in India in her bungalow practicing meditation by herself rather than joining in the communal activities with the others. So this was the Beatles saying, come on out and join in with the rest of us, Dear Prudence. So Mia Farrow, Prudence Farrow, another connection back into Rosemary's Baby. This is the Spahn Ranch, a short way out into the desert in California. And this place, owned by George Spahn, was used for many movies. Many westerns were filmed here. This is where the Manson family, so-called, hung out. George Spahn let them have some rooms there, and this is where they would spend their time when they weren't in LA or other places taking care of their business. This is featured in the Quentin Tarantino movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is complete revisionist history. That came out in 2019 to mark the 50th anniversary of the so-called Tate LaBianca murders. And Tarantino completely rewrote the narrative, and in his version of events, Sharon Tate and her friends survive, and the murderers, the would-be murderers that go up there to do the killings, end up becoming the victims themselves. They end up being taken out. So it's completely muddying the waters and just sowing confusion as to what may have happened with these events. And I do find that interesting because by that point, 2019, a lot of researchers had started asking questions about whether we've been told the truth concerning those events and the whole 60s counterculture, the whole hippie scene, the Beatles mythos, and everything else. And I wonder if it represented an exercise in damage limitation from the powers that be, because I think they do this from time to time. They just muddy the waters, sow confusion, foment discord, so anyone trying to get to the bottom of what really happened with any particular event is faced with a huge monumental task on their hands, sifting through all the lies, all the propaganda, all the disinformation, all the bullshit. They just do it to make our jobs that much more difficult. But they don't bank on our tenacity, do they? Because the more difficult they try and make it, the more hours we put in, right? We get there in the end. So according to a story which Matt Sergio has featured, he's the proprietor of the Occult Beatles and Conspiro Media WordPress sites. He's also my co-host on the Magical Mystery Talk podcast that we do concerning conspiratorial and esoteric aspects of the Beatles. Matt tells the story of when the raid occurred on the Spahn Ranch and Manson and his followers were eventually arrested. Apparently, scrawled on the door of one of the fridges there were some lyrics from one of the songs which would appear on the Beatles' Abbey Road album. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all good children go to heaven. The problem is that at the point that Manson and his crew were arrested, that Beatles album had not yet been released. This was before the era of things being leaked on the internet, you know? You had to buy the vinyl album. So the album came out in late September of '69, and there's no way that Manson and his crew could have heard that song, and therefore the lyrics, by having bought a copy of the album. So is it possible they had advanced knowledge of what was going to appear on the album because they moved in such circles as to have connections with the Beatles themselves? Something else to ponder, I feel. Moving on to Mark Chapman, as I say, the guy that was said to have murdered John Lennon. We have a lot of connections into Hawaii. Hawaii is a place that just keeps on coming up in this research. It's the US state, if you consider it a US state, that has more military bases than any other. That could be key to something. So by 1977, Chapman had relocated to Hawaii, an ideal location for mind control facilities given its remoteness. In his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Dave McGowan mentions that John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas spent several months in Hawaii gearing up for their incoming music career, apparently writing many of their songs. Was he receiving MK-style programming whilst there? Particularly if McGowan's suspicion that he was also being prepared to be a mind-controlled assassin is correct. John Phillips ended up co-curating the Monterey Pop Festival, which was a very influential event in the 60s counterculture, June of 1967, alongside Paul McCartney. Who else is it going to be? Here's Chapman in a video interview from his jail cell in Attica, New York, with Larry King. This is in 1992, and he's being asked about his recollections of that fateful night back in December 1980 when he's said to have shot John Lennon. Here's what he had to say about it.
I was standing there with the gun in my pocket.
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Sorry?
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Tried not to, praying not to, but knowing down deep it was probably going to come to that.
Did you know it would be that night? Did you know you would see him again?
Yes, I knew that morning, oddly, when I left the hotel, I had some type of premonition that this was the last time I was going to leave my hotel room. I hadn't seen him up to that point. That's what makes it interesting. I wasn't even sure he was in the building. And then I left the hotel room, bought a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, signed it to Holden Caulfield from Holden Caulfield, and wrote underneath that, "This is my statement," underlining the word "this," the emphasis on the word "this."
Everything he says there is entirely consistent with his having received MK Ultra style programming. So he's saying that he knew he was going to kill him, he didn't want to, but he knew it was inevitable because that's the programming. And he talks there about The Catcher in the Rye, this infamous book by J.D. Salinger, which is required reading in American schools, has been for decades, mandatory. There's a reason why they want that book to get into the minds of so many people. In the documentary A Clockwork Shining, which I appeared in alongside Joseph Atwill, Joe Atwill is breaking down how The Catcher in the Rye is telling the story of Holden Caulfield, the central character, being inducted through the various levels of Freemasonry. He's saying the whole book, the whole story, is a veiled allegory for Freemasonic ritual. And I don't doubt it. So The Catcher in the Rye is a trigger which causes the mind control programming to kick in. More fun in Hawaii. And Dave McGowan's book mentions that just days before Lennon's murder, Chapman had approached the occult filmmaker, an affiliate of the Church of Satan and Process Church of the Final Judgment, Kenneth Anger, also a close associate of the Rolling Stones, and he'd offered him a gift of some live bullets. In other tellings of the story, Chapman is claimed to have said, "These are for John Lennon," and the meeting is reputed to have happened in Hawaii. Is there a reason we had the series Hawaii 5-0, do you think, coming out of that particular location? Then we can throw Elvis Presley into the mix. Why? Why not? You know, he was the Beatles' main rival for a time, I guess, in terms of big music acts. And it seems highly likely that Elvis himself was mind-controlled, but the same may also be true of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. You may have seen the Baz Luhrmann directed movie Elvis from a few years ago, where Colonel Tom Parker was portrayed by Tom Hanks. Handlers often undergo programming themselves, and Parker underwent 2 years of military service in the 64th Coast Artillery at Fort Shafter, Hawaii. Where else is it going to be? And shortly afterwards he re-enlisted at Fort Barrancas in Florida. His biography tells us that he was punished with solitary confinement, from which he emerged with a psychosis that led him to spend 2 months in a mental hospital. His condition caused him to be discharged from the army. So in other words, Colonel Tom Parker, not his real name, he was a Dutchman, and he arrived on American shores in dubious circumstances. Nobody really seemed to know what his background was, very mysterious character, but he ended up being put with Elvis Presley to become his manager/handler, but it seems that Parker himself came from a background steeped in trauma-based mind control. I mean, solitary confinement of that nature is definitely something to send you around the bend, I would suggest, and that psychosis gets channeled, it gets used, utilised within expressions of organised society. So he was an ideal candidate for the job in many ways. But here's another thing which he would appear to have been involved with: a military project known as Operation Top Hat. This was conducted by the United States Army Chemical Corps at Fort McClellan, Alabama in 1953. It involved the testing of biological and chemical warfare methods, which is something that the father of Frank Zappa was involved with at the Edgewood Arsenal military base. Another nugget of information out of weird scenes inside the canyon. That's what Frank Zappa's old man did for a living. He wasn't a plumber. And army personnel were used as test subjects. So this is often the case as well. You know, they're just treated as cannon fodder, and they're treated as lab rats, military personnel. You know, dumb animals, as they were referred to by Henry Kissinger. Dumb, stupid animals, he called them, military men. So Parker would appear to have had an involvement in Operation Top Hat during his years of military service, and this brings in a very interesting and very well-known promotional photograph of Elvis Presley sat next to Colonel Tom Parker, and on the wall behind Elvis there we've got two dogs. One of them appears to be Nipper, who became the emblem of the HMV brand, but you've got another dog there with a top hat. The dog is wearing a top hat. And this is the only picture I've found where that dog is wearing a top hat, right behind Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis. So could this be a subtle, cryptic indicator that Colonel Tom Parker was indeed involved in Operation Top Hat? So it's telling those with the eyes to see, and back in the 1950s that would have been virtually no one, but these days we can know better, because we can do the research and learn what these signs and symbols mean. Is that a method of communication there? Now, I don't know how long it is since we all ate, but you might want to have a vomit bag next to you for this one, just in case, you know. So, yeah. Meet John Peel, BBC Radio 1 DJ for many years. Now, the interesting thing about Peel is that he always stayed outside of that typical smashy and nicey, sort of cheesy radio jock stereotype, you know, personified by the likes of Noel Edmonds and Mike Reed and Dave Lee Travis. And he was seen as a bit of a hero. He was on late at night and he championed these underground alternative bands, and he gave them airplay when no other DJs would. And he was sort of like a man of the people, you know, a bit of an icon to a whole generation. But does that mean he stayed outside of the culture of the times, given what we've come to know about Radio 1 and the BBC and all the stuff that went on there? Jimmy Savile is just the tip of the iceberg, you know, it went much further than that. Well, this picture is from a feature which Peel used to run on his late night Radio 1 show called Schoolgirl of the Year, where he would invite his listeners to send in pictures of themselves. Preferably there would be schoolgirls, and probably the younger the better. Peel met his wife Sheila when she was 15 years of age, married her shortly afterwards. And here's some interesting quotes from when he worked in Texas, Dallas, Texas, before he came back over to the UK and joined Radio 1 at its inception, September 1967, right at the tail end of that Summer of Love. He says, girls, some as young as 13, used to queue up outside his studio to offer him sexual favours. Well, of course I didn't ask for ID, he said. All they wanted me to do was to abuse them sexually, which of course I was only too happy to do. So blatantly, right there, he's coming out with it and stating what used to go on outside the radio studio in Texas. So he's an interesting figure, is Peel, because his real name is John Robert Parker Ravenscroft, and he comes from a very well-to-do, wealthy family, public school education. He was at Shrewsbury Public School with Michael Palin of Monty Python, same year, they were mates. And his family was in the cotton business. So he was sent over to Texas in the early 60s to represent the family business. But while he was there, he also became a radio DJ and got a number of shows and used that experience when he came back over to the UK to get his posting on Radio 1, so we're told. When you listen to radio tapes of those shows from the early 60s, you can hear that posh public school accent. It's still there, because he hadn't worked on losing it by that point. By the time he joined Radio 1 in 1967, he was sounding much more working class, and he'd, taken off the edge of that plummy sort of accent. Is it possible that he could also have been undertaking some sort of intel activity during his years in Texas also, however? His chosen pseudonym, John Peel, after all, was inspired by the founder of the English police force, John Peel. Is that a clue? Well, talk about right place at the right time. During his years in Dallas, Texas, he just happened to find himself present at the press conference immediately in the wake of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He found himself in the room where they paraded Lee Harvey Oswald to the press for the first time. Jack Ruby was there as well, who's the guy that is said to have killed Oswald. And Peel tells the story of how he blagged his way past a police roadblock. Like you do. President of the United States has just been murdered in broad daylight, and you walk up to a police roadblock, you're some young chancer, and you say, I'm a reporter for the Liverpool Echo, can I come in? Policeman says, in you go, lads. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's going to happen, right? So he says that he walked up to the police and he said, I'm a reporter from back in England. This is me mate. He had his mate Bob with him. He's a photographer. They had no ID, and Bob, despite being a photographer, didn't have a camera, but evidently it still wasn't a problem. Past the police roadblock they go and into the press conference. Here we've got Peel, in his own words, describing how he managed to get in there. He's speaking in a bit of a monotone, as he did, and there's music in the background, so it might be a bit difficult to hear, but I'm sure you'll get the main gist of what he's saying here.
There's a press conference in here, in a few minutes. And I said, I'm from the Liverpool Echo. And he said, he's my photographer. And we went down there. We haven't got a pen or paper or camera between us, but we went in there anyway. And they said, Henry Wade said, that this is the man who's been charged with the assassination of President Kennedy, and they brought in Lee Harvey Oswald, and he stood there kind of looking slightly puzzled and alarmed for a while, and then, but they in one of the films of this, which they showed on British television, they showed that Jack Ruby was in the room as well, which I didn't know he was until I saw this film, but they sort of panned across the room, and in the last few frames you can see me and my friend Bob standing there looking, like tourists.
So is there more to know about who John Peel really was? He died in 2004. I would suggest there is. You see, it's not just rock stars I destroy. I don't just destroy people's attachment to their favourite artists. I do it to DJs as well, because I came to realise that many of the DJs that I used to look up to weren't who I thought they were. So now I just piss everyone else off and destroy their heroes as well. So that's John Peel gone. We'll deal with the others later. Also in the new book, I've got this very interesting story which I only came across in 2021. And it concerns an individual, an aristocrat, a French count, not a spelling mistake. And he crops up in the backstory of many famous names in rock music, including Jim Morrison of The Doors, his partner Pamela Courson, Janis Joplin, the Rolling Stones, and Marianne Faithfull. So this is him, Count Jean de Breteuil, and he was born into a very wealthy French family. He was an heir to a fortune, and you might expect that his life would have consisted of castles, mansions, champagne parties, yachts, fast cars. But for some reason, he seems to have rejected all of that, and he became a heroin dealer to rock stars. This would appear to be the only picture that you can find of this guy anywhere online. Couldn't find any others. I'd never heard of him until a People magazine article documented him in 2021. So he is said to have sold heroin to Jim Morrison and Pamela Courson after they had moved to Paris from California. So we're told that Jim Morrison died at the age of 27 in the bathtub. I mean, you know, would it be any other age or any other place? In his Paris apartment on the 3rd of July 1971. There are many reasons to suspect that that account may not be entirely accurate. One reason is down to who Jim's father was. I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before. The Navy Admiral in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Admiral George Stephen Morrison. So Jim came directly out of a military family, high level connected, and he was also an actor. So he was portraying the role of Jim Morrison, the iconic rock god. But either way, his partner Pamela Courson is said to have got hooked on heroin, and she was one of the main customers of this guy, Jean de Breteuil. Also involved was Marianne Faithfull, who was an actress, a singer. She was involved with the Rolling Stones, in a relationship with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. You know, they weren't fussy, they used to share. And she also comes from an aristocratic bloodline on her mother's side, as so many of these characters do. So she's descended from the Sacher-Masoch family, coming out of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the Sacher side of the family, there's a Hotel Sacher in Vienna, Austria, which was featured in the movie The Third Man. And then on the Masoch side of the family, from the novel Venus in Furs, written by one of her ancestors, we get the term Masochism. So that's where she comes from. So she's said to have been in a sexual romantic relationship with the Count, Jean, and she says that on the night that Jim Morrison died, she was in bed with the Count, and he got a call telling him that Jim Morrison had just died. And she said he panicked, he smacked her about a bit, and he told her to pack her stuff, they're leaving for Morocco straight away. And he very quickly did a runner. There's alternative accounts of what happened to Jim Morrison that night. One comes from Sam Bennett, who was the proprietor of a nightclub in Paris called the Rock and Roll Circus. And he states that Jim turned up that night looking to score some heroin for Pam, and he got hooked up with a dealer. Jim disappeared into the toilets of the nightclub, and later he was found dead, according to this guy, Sam Bennett, having sampled some of the heroin and having OD'd on it. And he says that his body was then moved back to the bathtub in his apartment to kind of throw the scent off of what had happened at the club. I don't know if that was the case or not, but it's just an alternative take on things. And then we have Marianne Faithfull's account of what happened. So she said in a Mojo magazine interview some years ago, he went to see Jim Morrison and killed him. I mean, I'm sure it was an accident, poor bastard. The smack was too strong, yeah, and he died. And I didn't know anything about this. Anyway, everybody connected to the death of this poor guy is dead now, except me. So I'm writing the book, January this year, come across this story. Next thing I know, Marianne Faithfull, singular icon of British pop, dies aged 78. Tail end of January this year, the last individual involved in that story is now also dead. If you accept that Jim died when we're told he did. Because Pamela Courson died in 1974, she didn't last much longer. The Count himself died at the ripe old age of 22, having sampled some of his own stash, so we're told. He's also said to have sold the fatal dose of heroin that killed Janis Joplin. So he's got quite a lot to answer for. And he also moved within the Rolling Stones inner circle as well. According to one researcher, Jim Morrison's social security profile is still active. So we can make of that what we will. And one other story to end this section on, which is featured in Plumber. I went all the way back to the late 50s for this one, which came across my radar. And this involves the demise of three very famous names in rock and roll from its early years. So Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the artist known as the Big Bopper. So all three of these died when a light aircraft, which had been chartered by Buddy Holly to take them to the location of their next gig, crashed and killed all on board. 2nd of February 1959. Richie Valance was not even supposed to be on the flight. He'd flipped a coin and won his seat that way. And he commented at the time, "This is the first time I've won anything in my life." The Big Bopper was also reportedly not meant to be on that flight. He changed seats with Waylon Jennings because the Big Bopper was suffering from a cold, and Jennings had said, "You take my seat on the plane, you need it more than me, I'll slog it out on the tour bus." The events of that night were immortalised in the lyrics to a very famous song, American Pie, by the singer-songwriter Don McLean. This came out in 1971. The lyrics hint at some sort of supernatural aspect to what happened that night, or at least ritualistic aspect of it. So the lyrics include, "Oh, and as I watched him on the stage, my hands were clenched in fists of rage. No angel born in hell could break that Satan's spell. And as the flames climbed high into the night to light the sacrificial rite, I saw Satan laughing with delight the day the music died." So there are some overtones there suggesting some sort of Faustian bargain, possibly, this deal with the devil, so-called, that artists make in exchange for fame and fortune. And then occasionally the devil comes calling, wanting to call in the debt. The plot thickens with this aspect of the story. In 2015, it emerged that there was a lost verse to that song, American Pie, which nobody had ever seen up to that point. The manuscript was discovered among Don McLean's possessions, and it got published online. So for the first time, people could see how that song was going to end, but for whatever reason, the verse never made the cut that we're all familiar with. Here are the lyrics. "And there I stood, alone and afraid. I dropped to my knees, and there I prayed. And I promised him everything I could give, if only he would make the music live. And he promised it would live once more, but this time 1 would equal 4. And in 5 years, 4 had come to mourn, and the music was reborn." So again, there are hints at deals with the devil, Faustian bargain, with this verse. But what's interesting is he makes a reference to 1 becoming 4, and the music getting reborn in 5 years. So we're at February 1959, the events of the Buddy Holly plane crash. So 5 years on from that would give us February 1964, when 1 become 4. February 1964 is when the Beatles touched down for the first time at JFK Airport in New York, went on the Ed Sullivan Show, became an overnight sensation, Beatlemania, the British invasion was born, and they distracted the attention of traumatized, grieving Americans who were still mourning the loss of their president, which had happened just a few weeks before. Investigations into what happened on that fateful day were well underway, and it suited the controllers to have Americans looking over here instead of where all these investigations were happening. So the Beatles enter the stage, 1 becomes 4, the music is reborn, and they become the biggest thing in music since Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly. Did that Don McLean verse hint at knowledge of the Beatles being an orchestrated psyop designed to distract attention away from JFK and onto the British invasion, because it would have already been decided by the social engineers that the rest of the 1960s were going to be all about sex, drugs and rock and roll, and everything that these bands were used to usher in, all in the interests of social engineering, the shaping and moulding of societal attitudes. I'll leave that question with you. So I've got one more section to finish off with in this presentation. It's another aspect of what's in the new book. And with this book, the subject areas themselves are not new. And I make no claim that they are new. So it's more about mind control, it's more about social engineering, it's more about family backgrounds and ancestry and such, and who these artists most likely really are. It's more about occult symbolism. What is new is the specific information, the examples that are used to reinforce these points. I just assembled so much of this, hundreds of pieces of information, that I just thought it would be a travesty if this information doesn't get out there. It doesn't deserve to just fizzle off into nothingness. It needs telling. So I thought, well, guess I'm the guy for the job then. So another book it was. And I just wanted to get them between the covers of a book so that this information is preserved for posterity. And it's there now. And people can make of it and do with it what they will. So a very familiar subject area from my previous books is the idea of predictive programming, or the concept of placing the truth in plain sight, sometimes known as revelation of the method. So this is when the controllers, the instigators, the manipulators themselves, through their assets on the payroll, deliberately let us know about aspects of their agenda, stuff that they're doing, stuff that is to come. People ask, well, why would they tell us? Because they seem to feel the need to fulfill some sort of religious, ritualistic tenet, whereby they've told us in cryptic, coded form, in a way that many people couldn't ever reasonably be expected to comprehend. But as far as the occultists are concerned, they've put the truth out there. Now it's up to us what we do with it. If we choose not to act on it, if we choose not to heed the warning, then the onus is on us, and it's away from them. That's why they do it. And as I say, there are many examples. So we're heading in now to this New World Order, futuristic, dystopian nightmare society, AI, smart grid, transhumanism, all this stuff. We know how it all works now. But decades ago, it seemed we were getting early warnings from certain music artists. Looking at the genre of hip-hop, rap, very early on, one of the founding fathers of that whole culture went by the name of Africa Bambaataa, real name Lance Taylor, and his legacy has been severely tainted over the past 9 years since allegations emerged in 2016 from two men initially, but many more came forward after that, accusing Bambaataa of having sexually molested them when they were minors, when they were a part of his Universal Zulu Nation cult, some would say. Whatever the case, Bambaataa would appear to have known a thing or two about a thing or two way back in the 1980s, because he put out this song, Warlocks and Witches, Computer Chips, Microchips, and You. And this song talks about much of the stuff that is incoming now. 40 years ago, this guy knew about it, when we didn't. How? On this record is featured John Lydon, otherwise known as Johnny Rotten, the Sex Pistols. He had some musical affiliations with Bambaataa, seemingly curated by Malcolm McLaren, who'd been the Sex Pistols manager. So the lyrics to this song include Warlocks and Witches, Computer Chips and Microchips. I'm in the 1980s. The world's gonna strip. The future's here. It's a crazy scene. Can you hear the revolution? What did he know? How about the rapper Nas? So we're going forward here to the turn of the millennium, 1999 becoming 2000. He had his album Nostradamus, and he had a song on it called New World. Just missing the word order. But New World, and it includes these lyrics. Yo, welcome to a new world, new beginning, a new way to play, new way of living. Cash is the past. Not here, it's not. A new way of spending. So, foreknowledge of a cashless society incoming. This is 1999. Further on in that song, swallow a little pill. There's a 4-course meal. Say hello to the one world. Government. Say hello to the sky. Something's out there watching you and I. More enticing than Star Trek, StarTAC phones. Your genes and DNA is used to make clones. You got CD-ROM, everything operates by computers. Then what happens when the circuit breaks? Well, we found out in Spain and Stansted Airport the other day, didn't we? How about Prince? Definitely a character that knew a thing or two. You might have seen the sequence that I've played in previous presentations where he appears to display foreknowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11 in 2001 at one of his concerts in Utrecht in the Netherlands in December 1998. Almost 3 years before 9/11 would get pinned on Osama bin Laden. I mean, he didn't do it, but they pinned it on him. Prince appeared to know about this. And he says at the end of his sequence there, got to get back to America, Osama bin Laden's getting ready to bomb. And then one of his band members says, 2001, hit me. So they knew the year that event was going to happen and the fact that it was going to get blamed on bin Laden. So in 1996, Prince, at this point known by this symbol as his name, had his song New World, including lyrics, when the lines blur every boy and girl, how are we going to make it in this brave new world? Love for one another, new world. When you want to find some isolation, but the tracker you got from vaccination keeps playing, you'll never walk alone over and over, they're always listening, especially on the phone. This is almost 30 years ago. Is this the type of thing that got Prince killed, if you accept that's what happened to him? And there's one other example that I'll leave you with. And for this one, we're going all the way back to 1985. 40 years. And it's a song coming from a group known as the Family International. The Family International is effectively a mind control cult. And this song was written and performed by one of its members who joined in 1970 after he left Fleetwood Mac. Jeremy Spencer, a one-time guitarist with that group, appears to have been the brainchild behind this. The song is called Kathy, Don't Go to the Supermarket. Here's a section of the video, and it kind of tells its own story.
Hey guys and gals, get hip with a new craze. Register today for your very own personal 666 barcode implant. No more need to carry cash or credit cards. The price of the goods you buy is now automatically subtracted from your bank account by the computer terminal at the checkout stand. It's fast, it's easy.
There's a very strange man at the checkout stand, and there's a laser scanner where you put your hand. Kathy, don't go to the supermarket today. Don't go, Kathy, don't go. Without a computer ID, there's no way to pay. Don't go, please don't go. I know there's a sale and a special on rice, and you can buy beans at a giveaway price, but that's just their way to get you down there. What you don't know is that they're everywhere.
These days, in my local Lidl and Sainsbury's, you have to scan a barcode on your receipt for the gate to open to let you out. Incoming. 40 years ago, we were getting warned about all this stuff in the form of this music video. We were just supposed to know that it wasn't a fictional scenario in a music video, but it's society in 40 years if we don't stay alert and combat it in any way that we can. And Jeremy Spencer, formerly of Fleetwood Mac, appeared to know all about it. So that's pretty much it. Come in just about time. I think we've got the Q&A later, so I won't do questions right now, but those are some snippets from the new book and some other aspects of my research, and I hope you found it of interest. I've got copies of all my books here if you've missed any, but I think most people have probably got them by now. But the new one is now out. No One's Dad's a Plumber. Got these rather cool t-shirts as well. So I think we're going to break now. Yeah? Dinner time? Thanks for listening. Thank you, appreciate that. See you after dinner, yeah? Q&A time.
All right, everybody. How are we doing? Are we still awake? Are we still sober? Just.
Come on, sit down, Joe. What are you doing?
It's quality. Yeah, it's not bad. Not a bad Scottish accent. Normally sound Welsh. Wait for more stragglers.
It's usually him. It's always him.
It's always him.
We'll try and do a Q&A, although I don't think any of us think we're the fonts of knowledge, do we? Really? No?
Leave that to John Hamer.
Yeah, leave that to John Hamer, yeah. Are you going to do a roving mic?
Yeah, I can do.
Anybody got any questions? I think Stuart wants to talk about something in a second, but we'll do that towards the end, if that's all right with you, Stuart? Yeah. We are going to look at organising a live event in London. September 27th, I do believe, Saturday. It's at a comedy club in London. What's the comedy club called?
Backyard Comedy Club.
Yeah. So we've penciled that in. It's going to be a 3-hour sort of gig. I'm going to put a presentation together for all of us that we'll just chat about, I suppose, for 3 hours. Be a break in the middle, etc. But it's one of those comedy clubs where you're in and out, so we haven't got time like this today.
Probably 3 till 6.
Yeah.
But there's a bar upstairs after.
Yeah, there's a bar and everything upstairs afterwards, so...
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, just didn't want it. You don't want to be just in and then churned out into the streets of London, do you? Yeah, you got to have a gag and chat shit for a bit.
And you're good at that, aren't you?
I'm good at that, yeah.
Very good, yeah. Right then, so, go on, say, Mark?
Not at this stage.
No.
Give it time.
Just going on Mark's thing, I was saying to him, Curtis Mayfield brought an album out called New World Order.
Yeah.
Do you think he was part of the thing, Mark? Because...
well, he didn't last too long, did he?
Well, when he wrote that last album, he was paralysed because the stage fell on him and paralysed him.
He had little to lose then.
Then he brought that album out, and then he was dead very quickly after.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of those songs. I think I've featured them on my podcast as well. But yeah, all these singers that speak out don't seem to live to a ripe old age. Yeah. Don't know if you've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, you've even got to wonder about getting crippled, because I think he was playing live when he got crippled.
Yeah.
I love Curtis Mayfield, it's one of my favourites.
Teddy Pendergrass, same.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, same way.
Yeah.
Got paralysed.
Weren't the rumours about him being transvestite?
Teddy Pendergrass?
Yeah, I think there were, because he was an overtly male sort of soul singer. But there were rumours about him being gay, being into transvestite.
Never heard that.
Yeah.
I think Lenny Henry based Theophilus P. Wildebeest on him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he did, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Has anyone got any questions?
Are you going to get into the middle there, Chris?
I'll pass him the microphone, you numpty.
Yeah, firstly I'd like to applaud all of you.
Come on, Jim.
Testing. A bit of a top-end feedback there, I think. I'll do that, Mike. I'd like to applaud all of you guys for the amazing deep dive research that you do. And it's fascinating to understand where we are, or how we've got to where we are now. But I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts about the remedies available to us to get out of this?
Do you want to answer that one, Mark?
Yeah. No, you're all right. You first.
Well, do you know what? Being blunt, I don't think there is a remedy. That's my honest answer to you. I think we've got to carry on doing what we're doing. I just think it's an eternal fight. That's, I think we're up against people who have been doing this for thousands of years, or entities, whatever you want to call it. And that's not a giving up or sacking it off type of thing. I mean, in 2020, I was just having a conversation down there, we were having dinner. Yeah, we didn't have the jabs, we said no and all this stuff, but it didn't stop it happening. It didn't stop, and that, again, that's not me being negative or anything like that. I'm not looking at changing the world anymore. Passing it on to the next generation, maybe. We might have a conversation with Mark.
What do you mean anymore, though?
But, yeah. I've got a question. How many pairs of cords have you got, Chris?
Does that include shirts, hats, or just trousers?
Just an array of cords. No, corduroy. No,
quite a few.
Yeah, I forgot where I were now.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Sorry, tangent.
Buy more cords.
I suppose
Solutions.
what we've just done there, laughing. You know, the things that we're doing now, where we're getting together and stuff like that. The system don't want this. It doesn't want this. You know.
That's why there's so very few venues, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Why you've got to dance around trying to find venues. I mean, the guy in London, his basic answer to Chris, I don't give a shit what you talk about. That's what he said, isn't it?
That's what you want.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but it's difficult because you've got to open a conversation with them to say we're going to be talking about X, Y, Z, and people who come are going to be nutters as well. But you know, last year, right? I remember Louise, my friend, mine and Chris's friend who works here. Well, she's more my friend. Gets me. Yeah. She said, Josh was downstairs. Said the staff said, "Oh, they're all right, weren't they?" Like, I don't know what they're expecting, like three-eyed monsters walking in, or
pitchforks and torches,
biting the heads off bats.
Yeah, or people in cords, or something like that. But quite possibly. But yeah, we're everybody, aren't we? Everybody here has got different backgrounds, I suppose. Keep laughing, churning work out, talking to people. Mike Williams had that girl on this week who were talking about the Beatles and things like that. My youngest son tells me about chemtrails. He sees them. He's 13. You know, he was telling me yesterday he's now had sort of seen deja vu signals and synchronicities and things like that. I've not talked to him about synchronicities. He was telling me about that. You know, that's because he's brought up in a household that's open and can do that. And this is the first sort of like. We went through the hard roads, all of us, learning and jumping over the fence and falling out with people and trying to remonstrate with people about how right we were. But our kids it's normal to them, this conversation. It's not, I know some kids don't buy into it, but it is normal. To my son, it's normal for me to have a podcast. He's been brought up with us having a podcast and talking about this stuff. Run a scenario. That book that I brought in, wherever I put it there, about William Sargent. I think I've mentioned this earlier on. Showed it to my wife, and she says, "Is that so? If William Sargent were involved in sort of like Beatles, MK Ultra, is he the sergeant of Sergeant Pepper's?" So this is my wife, right? So I sent that over to Matt Sergiu, yeah, who then sent, "Well, you do realise," because she said, "But what's the pepper?" Well, Mark, what's the pepper?
So in Rosemary's Baby, going back to that movie, there's a pendant that gets given to Rosemary by the neighbour, the elderly neighbour, who turns out to be part of this satanic cult. And it's described as tannis root, otherwise known as the devil's pepper. And this is what's given to Rosemary, and also in the prequel to that movie, Apartment 7B, there's another young woman in that, and it causes them to black out, and then they get impregnated by this demonic entity. And when they wake up, they have no memory of it. So that's what the devil's pepper is. So when he mentioned Sargent there, William Sargent, and you put that together with Rosemary's Baby, the devil's pepper, makes you wonder, doesn't it? Does me.
But bear in mind, like my wife weren't into any of this stuff going back, well, when I first met her 20 years ago. And obviously I've indoctrinated her, I know. But she was actually open to these conversations. It's just that she didn't want to dive down a rabbit hole. But she's spotting stuff like that type of thing, that link there, and passing it. My kids are hearing that then, you know. My eldest son's 31, didn't have his my grandson jabbed. Didn't even have to have the conversation. There was no conversation. And his other half, he'd chosen somebody who had bought into that. She knew she weren't having him jabbed either. You know, that's the way that's the future, if you like, where you've got a group of people who are probably the outsiders, but we're still within the system. You know, I've got people here, Leia here. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't have been open during COVID. You know, we've got people who are ingrained within the system, nurses, doctors, whatever, who work for the system but aren't really on side with it.
Vive resistance.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that in cards.
Like cards, yeah. I was going to say when you're going to buy your son some cards.
Yeah, no, we'd
Make
have
him into a real man.
We'd have a like a. Do you know like the Nazis had Hugo Boss?
Yeah,
we'd all wear cards.
Outfit.
Yeah.
Corduroys in a hat like Jeff's.
Yeah. Why not?
So I think we're stemming the tide, aren't we? Even if we can't fix things, we're keeping the tide at bay and putting a few obstacles in the path of what they're trying to do. And that's got to be worth something.
Well, it seems like that's why we're here. I also understand that, say, and this is not we were into this before or that, but people who woke up in 2020, that must have been a horrible download of information. I'm glad I didn't realise in 2020, because huge amounts of information there to take in. But when you go through these different phases, at first you become angry because you've been had, then you become an evangelist. And people have had to go through these phases over a very short space of time. Whereas people like, a few people I know, like you, like Sean and Lorraine and people like that, and maybe Jeff. No, not Jeff. Jeff were 2020. So we're all going through these things at different stages, even though we're all old bastards in here. Well, Chris is. Even though we're all knocking on, you know, we're all still going through it at different stages. Some of us are angry, pissed off about it. Some of us are more pragmatic like me. I don't really care if I change somebody's mind now, being blunt. No interest. I'll have an open conversation with neighbours if they don't like it. Tough shit.
Some of us are cynical and nihilistic. World weary and jaded.
I don't know whether I answered that, but there you go. Like I say, you guys have probably got more answers on that than I've. Chuffing hell with avalanche.
That's the solutions question out the way anyway.
Yeah, we've got that one out.
So what do you think are going to priorities next? What do you think is coming down the line?
Global climate warming change. We're already on about standpipes in this area of the world. It pisses down. For 11 months a year, we get a month where it doesn't rain, and now it's standpipes. You go to Dubai, it's 45 degrees, never a shortage of water there. It's weird. UAE or Saudi Arabia, never a shortage of water there. Here, first signs of sun, standpipes. Hosepipe down. Yeah, well, that were cloud seeding. Cloud seeding, they were advertising it in papers. Yeah, advertising it in papers.
Like you found out, Spook, there's been no reservoirs built since the 90s. Just
one reservoir since 1990. Since it was privatised, been one reservoir. So I would say water shortage, possibly, that's me guessing, because that's in the press at the moment. They're trying to build it up every year. I don't think people will buy that there's a water shortage. But, I mean, the lakes, how deep are the lakes? A few people from Cumbria. I mean, they were shipping water. I remember in '94, they were shipping water from Cumbria in tankers and filling Scammerton Dam up. No, there was no talk then of global climate warming change and bullshit.
The highest
like
rainfall in England.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone? Question. This is a Columbo question. I remember it. Is it?
Hold that thought.
This is for Mark. It's me again, I'm sorry.
Thank God for that.
I'm sorry. So, obviously you know lots about the Tate LaBianca murders and whatnot. And when BitChute was up and going, I used to do a lot of research on Peter Falk, Columbo. And I found it really interesting. It came up, I don't know whether you've heard this, but you know there were like some dodgy tapes found in the loft at the Tate house.
Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently, from my research, Columbo was on a lot of these sex tapes. I don't know whether you've heard that. And what I thought was really odd was he used to go to court every day for the trial,
Right.
the tape trial. I just thought that was really weird. Why would he do that? Have you ever found anything on him in particular, or has he ever cropped
I
up
think
in
I
your-
remember hearing something about him being involved in that whole case. I don't have a whole lot on it.
I just think he's really dodgy.
Yeah. Well, there
Got it
are
in
all
for
kinds of
Columbo,
claims made about what was going on at that house at CLO Drive. Like, they were into selling drugs. There were snuff tapes, apparently, that were being
Yeah, 'cause
dealt on the black market.
I heard that, like, Sharon Tate, she was into it, you know, all the deviousness and stuff. And as soon as she got pregnant, she wanted to sort of, obviously,
Yeah.
'cause she got a child on the way, she wanted to turn her back on that. And Polanski was like, not so keen.
Yeah, I've heard all that, and I heard it all before I came across the theory that the entire event may have been a stunt set up. And I think a lot of those stories were probably put out there to get people thinking along those lines. Anything other than them applying a bit of critical thought to the question of whether the murders actually took place the way we're told they did. I do still have some question marks about the LaBianca murders, and it could be that they were genuine, as we were told. But I no longer buy that Sharon Tate and the others died in the way we're told they did. Just because I've looked at the work of Miles Mathis, and he makes some very convincing points with evidence that I can't refute.
Did you watch Chaos on Netflix?
Uh,
It was about the
no.
Tate LaBianca.
Is that based on the book by
Yeah.
what's
yeah.
his name?
Tom O'Neill.
Tom O'Neill,
Yeah.
yeah.
What did you think
I've
of
read
that?
the book, but I didn't see the series.
Okay. Yeah. I thought it was quite good because they came from the MK Ultra angle, didn't they?
It is a good book. It's very well researched, but he's kind of sticking to the official narrative on all things, rather than deviating from the
When you've
script.
seen him interviewed, he says, I won't go off into the weeds. That's his thing. I won't go into the grey areas around the edges.
AKA conspiracy.
Yeah,
land.
exactly.
Yeah.
Doesn't want to be labelled with that.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that. A lot of people say that the resulting court case was a setup and was designed to lead to certain outcomes. But you don't often hear the suggestion that the entire event may have been fake.
Do you remember in the early heyday of YouTube? I remember seeing Miles Mathis. But there was a video when they raided the ranch, and all the coppers were like in costume cop clothes.
Yep.
I mean, you can't find that video anymore.
That's in the Miles Mathis paper.
Was it?
And he points out that all the so-called cops are in the wrong uniform. It's not
Yeah.
the uniform that force uses, and they just look like film props.
Hollywood uniform.
And Manson's supposed to have been arrested, and he's just standing there all meekly, not putting up any kind of a fight.
Yeah.
And then there's a shot, like as if it's between takes, where they're about to go for their tea break, and they're all just standing around.
Yeah, I remember that.
It just
yeah.
doesn't look real.
No, and I think the chance that it was just all invented. And then shortly after the Chaos book, the Netflix, well, before the Netflix thing, the Tarantino thing came out, like you said.
Yeah.
But even when you watch that, at the end, and by the end you're like urging them on to kill them, whatever. But then when you actually think about it, you're watching a load of grown men murder some brainwashed teenage girls, which is also horrible.
Yeah, who at that point had done nothing to them.
Yeah, and they just murder them, and you're like, yeah.
That's Tarantino,
And it's
though, isn't
quite
it?
horrible, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not a Tarantino film without a blood.
Just for the
gore
record,
fest.
anyone who wasn't here last year, she was asking Columbo questions last year.
Yeah.
She's got a thing for Peter Falk for some reason.
I know. And
One more thing.
Yeah, just one. Yeah. And have you done much research on Dennis Wilson? Because obviously he had ties to Manson
And that whole crew,
and all
yeah.
that kind of stuff. Because his links to all that was really interesting. Because I'm
Yeah.
a big Beach Boys fan as well, and
Yeah, he was very much tied up with the whole Laurel Canyon crowd and also Manson. He was recording some of Manson's songs.
yeah.
And Manson
Because he
actually-
actually stole some of one of Manson's songs, didn't he?
Yeah, well, one of the Beach Boys songs was written by Manson that they actually
Yeah,
recorded.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Manson was evidently quite a promising up-and-coming musician, but evidently went a different path. But Dennis Wilson was caught up in that whole thing.
Yeah, sad.
And then turned up drowned.
Maybe he wrote some Beatles songs as well, given what you just presented there with them foreknowledge of what some of the lyrics were.
Quite possibly, yeah. Well, according to Mike Williams, the Beatles didn't write all their own songs. It's physically impossible for them to have done because of the logistics involved. So if that's the case, anything becomes fair game. Anyone could have written those songs.
Wasn't he quoted as saying that the Beach Boys wouldn't have existed without Charles Manson?
Who said that?
I don't know. That was a quote from somebody. I don't know, one of the Beach Boys, I think.
Hmm. Well, they had quite a close working relationship, Manson and both the Wilsons.
Shall I get that microphone off?
Sorry, yes, I'll...
Is that your other pet subject, the Beach Boys? Peter Falk.
Yeah, it's just a question for Mark. The band, The Weeknd, you've heard of The Weeknd, haven't you? Blinding Lights, that's one of the big hits.
Yeah.
They've got like really satanic album covers, and a lot of the songs have got satanic sort of wording to them. They released a song just before COVID with Blinding Lights, and everyone was encouraged to do TikTok dances, a bit like the Nurses was doing during COVID. And I just looked into who wrote the song, and it said there was about 4 or 5 different top songwriters all came together to write this song for him. And I just thought, have you looked into that, and what's your views on it?
I try to avoid The Weeknd. The group name is very interesting as well, or the act name, because it's not The Weekend, it's The Weeknd with the E missing.
Right.
Almost as if that's the way the controllers imagine the audience to be when they've listened to the music, Weekend. Because I think they do that sometimes as a form of mockery. There was the group The Grateful Dead, which is how the controllers saw the fan base of that particular group, you know, spiritually dead and ignorant. So I tend not to look at much current contemporary stuff because I can't stand to wallow in it for too long. But I have noticed that there are several songwriters credited with many of these pop acts now. So when you get pop princesses, Britney Spears or Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, you often find 7, 9 different songwriters on the same song. So if all those people really have been involved, it's like a committee, and each person will be bringing something different to the table. Like, oh, we've got to have a reference to this, that's got to be in there somewhere. We've got to have this frequency in the breakdown somewhere. And all these things go into the melting pot to create the finished product. So it's a much more complex process than it ever used to be, I think. And there's a lot of stuff happening on an unseen level now that everything is digital and electronic. A lot of stuff can get baked into the recording that the conscious mind is not aware of.
Because that song is a particularly catchy song, and you know, it had people, all the young kids on TikTok dancing to it, and yeah.
Always be suspicious of anything that comes with its own dance, or its own logo, its own slogan, its own phrase. That's because it's been selected as one that they want to get into the public consciousness, and that they want it trending. They want young people to be all up on it. There's going to be a reason why a song like that has been selected.
Baby Shark.
Baby Shark, I'm sure there's a reason for that. Yeah. I don't profess to know what it is, but yeah, I know. Black Lace, oh, they're bad.
I know.
They're into some bad shit.
I had to buy a load of plastic bloody baby sharks when my nipple was born. She became obsessed with it.
Thank you. It's a question for Mark. I'll stand up because I'm quite short.
You'll get one in a minute.
I know you covered some DJs in your book, and I've heard a few of your interviews on your new book. But I was wondering, did you ever find out anything about Dave Lee Travis? I know that he sort of suddenly was sort of thrown off the BBC and then later alleged to, you know, sexual offences or something. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I just wondered whether you found out anything, because he used to be my favourite.
He was your favourite?
Yeah, he was at one point. Yeah, thank you.
He was a smashy and nicey inspiration, wasn't he? Well, the thing about Dave Lee Travis is he appears to have been thrown under a bus to a certain extent. In the wake of the Jimmy Savile revelations and all the stuff that was coming out about the BBC, it seems that they needed a few scapegoats. We're in scapegoat lane right now, so relevant. But they needed to create the impression that something was being done, we're dealing with this, we've got it. And as far as I recall, Dave Lee Travis was accused of groping women's breasts. I think that's what it was. I don't recall him being accused of being involved with children or minors in any way. So he got mixed up in this whole sorry mess alongside names like Savile and Chris Denning that were coming through, and Stuart Hall and people like that. And I think they just wanted to make an example of him, and he was an easy target. And he just got thrown under the bus along with a few other low-level names, so that the real high rollers, the real offenders, could fly under the radar and keep getting away with it. And it's interesting now, we've got the P. Diddy trial, Sean Combs, that kicked off this week. And there are going to be revelations coming through about that, but I think we're going to see the same thing. Low-level names being tossed out there to create the impression that, look, we're on this, this is getting sorted. But you won't hear any really big names, any real shockers. That's going to be kept under wraps. So I think it's just something they do from time to time, and Dave Lee Travis was unfortunate enough to get caught up in it all.
Just an observation before about Dennis Wilson. The unfinished album that he had was Pacific Ocean Blue, wasn't it? And it was finished in mid-2000s, but it was Taylor Hawkins who did the vocals, who also later died, drummer for the Foo Fighters. But the actual question is more about the Beatles, the kind of stuff that we've talked about today. Have you done any research into Ivan Vaughan, Paul McCartney's best friend?
Myself, no.
The only reason I say it because he worked in the establishment in London under Jonathan Miller, and he had a documentary made about him in the 80s. He was a university lecturer, professor at Oxford, and I can't remember what it was about, but he ended up with, I think it was MS, and it was all about his debilitating disease and stuff like that. But there's when you can smell something fishy around Ivan Vaughan.
That'd be Chris Whitter.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Well, Jonathan Miller, we're getting into Asher territory.
We are, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that whole crowd again.
He directed Alice in Wonderland as well, didn't he?
That's right.
With Spike Milligan.
And his father, Emmanuel Miller, worked with Richard Asher and William Sargent as well.
Yeah.
All of them. Yeah. The Beach Boys, the Wilsons, had a royal bloodline as well. I haven't released that one yet. I've done that many royal genealogies. I just keep them on file. But the Wilsons definitely had one. Forget who back to now. Might have been a French king.
Charlemagne.
Anyway, yeah, it might have been. Yeah.
Usually is.
As a side note, when you mentioned the Foo Fighters, a mate of mine who I work with, massive Foo Fighters fan, goes to every gig that they do. And then he came out and it turned out he'd had an affair and had a baby with another woman, other than his wife. But I thought it was interesting because my mate was devastated because he's like, married with 2 kids. And one kid, sorry. But just as a social engineering, like, shock value thing, the way he was just put into the press. And then he was just, like I said, I watched this guy who was devastated. He was, like, visibly upset about it, that his hero had gone off and done the dirty on his missus and had a baby with someone else. Don't know what anyone thinks of that. As a side note.
Bruce Springsteen were in Huddersfield last night.
Huddersfield?
Was he? Yeah, he was at a restaurant, apparently. He's playing in Manchester with Stephen Graham. My wife saw him on the actor. My wife saw him on Instagram. And obviously people saying, "Oh, hero in Huddersfield."
Yeah. Such a hero that you needed a tap to go and see him at his shows in 2021. Man of the people.
And he wouldn't play
working class hero.
He wouldn't play where there were unisex toilets as well.
He's a proper man. He rolls up his sleeves and everything. He don't wear corduroy.
He wears leather waistcoats. As another side note, my mother-in-law's sister looks like Cliff Richard. No, she's right miserable bitch. Dead ringer.
So does a wrinkled prune.
Yeah, dead ringer.
How many beers before they start looking like Cliff Richard?
No, she literally looks like him all the time. I told my missus, what doesn't happen?
Hold your mic to your mouth, Chris.
Fuck off, Dom.
I can't hear you. Hold your mic to your mouth. Paul, front.
One down here.
And turn it on as well.
Turn you on.
Right, you mentioned the war memorials and where they were built. I've got a friend who's kind of into ley lines and things like that, and he says that a lot of the war memorials are built on ley lines. Yeah, and obviously ley lines are meant to be some kind of, you know, what?
I'm laughing because Chris is like, that's how we'll pick up on recording.
But
he's going to bust a freestyle later. Oh, bloody hell.
What I was trying to get at, the guy who sent me the one about the water thing. So there's obviously some kind of ley line where the water's flowing, and then they build that on there for some, I don't know, some demonic reason.
Obviously something in the ley lines that they're trying to, yeah.
Anyone else?
Hi. Do you think all of these people who are supposed to have died have died?
No.
Thank you. On to the next question.
Were you looking for examples or a blanket statement?
Well, you have been paid for this, so earn your money.
Actually, I haven't yet.
He hasn't been paid yet.
I don't think you can make a blanket statement. I think you have to look at each case individually. And when it comes to music artists, there's reason to suspect that many of them may have been allowed to fake their deaths. So I've never bought the Jim Morrison story myself. I've never bought that Elvis Presley died when we're told he did in 1977, because he had military intelligence connections as well, just like Jim Morrison. The David Bowie one is a bit weird when you factor in Jack Stephen, the guy that they wheeled out the following day, who looked and sounded just like Bowie. Michael Jackson, that's a bit weird because you've got that guy Dave, who's supposed to have been a Burns victim, but he looked like Michael Jackson under heavy makeup and had the same voice. So there's some weird ones out there. There are some other artists where it seems to be much more clear-cut. I personally feel that they took George Michael out for being outspoken. Fairly clear that they took Whitney Houston out. So, yeah, it's a case of looking at each one individually, but I'm sure some have been allowed to fake their deaths.
What about John Lennon with the Miles Massive work?
Yeah, Mathis feels that Lennon's assassination was faked. I can't 100% rule it out. I mean, I lean towards Lennon's death being genuine, but Mathis makes some very compelling points, and it wouldn't be the first time that this sort of thing has happened. That would be a real mindfuck, because it would mean that John Lennon could be alive, but he's pretending to be dead, and Paul McCartney's dead, but he's pretending to be alive. So that really would, yeah, that's a mindfuck.
What was your first inquiry, if you like? What did you delve into first, the pair of you, you know? Do you remember? What got you
Change
into
your
all
name to
this?
Mark Devlin.
Oh, yeah.
I've been called worse.
Yeah. Go on,
Do you mean music industry research?
Yeah.
Well, I got set on the path to all this by the work of David Icke. So I started reading David Icke books and looking at his public talks and stuff, and that made me realise that the world is nothing like we thought it was. And Icke highlighted how the world of the military and academia and science and medicine and banking is all completely corrupt and deceptive. And I thought, well, that means it must play out in the world of entertainment then, because there's no way they would have left that alone. And having been a DJ and having been a big music fan, I just wanted to know more about how the music industry had been used for deceptive means. And I threw myself down about 5,000 different rabbit holes all at the same time. And there seemed to be a bit of a job vacancy back then. We're going back best part of 20 years now, because there didn't seem to be any high-profile researcher who spoke specifically about what the music industry is used for. And I just thought, well, I guess the job's mine then. And I just kind of stumbled into it. And I started off looking at the website of Vigilant Citizen, which is still a great resource. It's still going now. And he goes into occult symbolism and mind control symbolism and stuff like this. And I learned how to spot all these different signs and symbols and icons and motifs that they use. So that was the first area, really, and one thing led to another. I made the mistake early on of thinking it was contemporary music, like music of the 2000s. And the more I researched it, I realised, oh God, it goes back to the 1990s. Oh shit, it goes back to the 1980s. Oh shit, the 70s, 60s, 50s. And then I was back at 1955, and that's as far back as I go. Somebody else can do pre-55. Dom?
What's that? Oh, you want my
Man
answer?
for the job? You ain't got much on.
No, not much on, no. I'll fit that in between having my hair cut. Or plucking me rogue antler eyebrow at times. Were you asking me the same question, or? No? No. Yeah, no, anyway. Too many questions.
Yeah, what got you started?
Me? JFK. In late 80s. When I were...
Yeah, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
We've heard of Dolly the sheep. Now, how many of these celebrities do you think are clones or genetically created?
Well, we had Dolly Draper. Garraway's...
It is.
Is it? Yeah. I didn't even know that. Yeah. How mad's that? How weird's that? Yeah. Look into my eyes, not round my eyes, into it. Yeah. The Matrix. To be honest with you, I don't. It's not something I've looked into the cloning side of it, but they are cloning things. It's definitely happening.
You find a lot of researchers that make the blanket statement that all celebrities are cloned. And there's also this area of research which would have you believe that all celebrities are the opposite gender of what they're presented. And I'm sure there's some of that goes on, but I don't think you can say that every single person in the public eye is the opposite gender to how they're presented. So with cloning, a lot of the exponents of that idea will tell you that anyone famous has been cloned. I don't know if that's the case. There's this guy, Donald Marshall, some of you might have heard of, who claims to have been come out of a military sort of family background. He says that he was involved in cloning experiments in deep underground military bases and such. And he says this sort of thing goes on all the time. But I don't know. It's a real minefield area of research, and you have to kind of become full-time, I think, and really throw yourself into it to get anywhere with it. And I don't have the time. You probably do.
No.
You're not doing anything between 2 and 3 a.m.
No. I'll let Matt Sergio take that on in his shed. He's another one in a shed, isn't he? Yeah. Chris is in a shed. Yeah, I'm in a dungeon.
Things they do to escape their women, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
You take him off away from Mac a bit, Dom, it's a bit loud.
I don't take advice off people who wear corduroy.
I think Taylor Swift gives off some very geezer vibes, don't you, Mark? What do you think about? What do you think about?
It's terrifying to think of how many apparently female celebs I may have lost it over in previous years, and if I were to whip down their pants, I would have a very crying game type surprise. It's horrifying, really. I don't like to spend too much time thinking about it.
Who was that? You showed a video on Thursday, Dom, with Taylor Swift and another. Who was the little girl with her?
I don't know who was that little girl. Who?
Is it? Yeah. She's giving off. She's proper geezer vibes, isn't she? And little tiny girl next to her. Yeah.
Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah.
Looks like.
She's very strange.
This is to all of you. With the research that you've done and your findings, have you ever been warned off?
What's that? No.
Not directly, not overtly.
No. I mean, YouTube stopped videos and things like that, but
we've been deplatformed, haven't we? Like channels got rid of, but not a warning as such, not personally.
No.
We got that
one
letter
I
from
can think
BBC
of.
for it.
Yeah, but that was slightly different. That was a corporation telling you couldn't put a video up because it went viral. But no. I think if he, yeah, he loves us. Yeah, he actually quoted the July whatever meeting we had here. Yeah, he quoted it. Yeah. Get him on as a guest. Would you really have that twat here? You know what I mean? You just. Yeah. I just wouldn't want to talk to someone like that, to be honest with you. I just couldn't entertain being in their presence. And you probably don't want to be in mine either, but...
Send him an invite to the next gig.
Yeah. I'd probably want to hit him, Mark.
Oh yeah, that was all a year ago, wasn't it? From here.
Yeah, it was a year ago,
July,
yeah.
Yeah, but if you invited him, he wouldn't come. You know he wouldn't come.
Has everybody seen that video that he did, that he put together, when he was walking through that field? Yeah, and he keeps cutting it, and... I've never watched it, but he was ranting and raving. He was laughing his head off him, wasn't he?
Well, he said, I'm not even interested in conspiracies, so I don't know why they've done this. But yeah, he's written a book and he's doing a tour. He's not interested though. Just did it for.
And I'll invite him up onto stage to discuss it with me.
Yeah. His eyes were spinning with anger.
Yeah.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And
he's just an unfunny bastard.
And he called us as thick as mince.
Yeah, thick as mince.
And you can buy the T-shirt saying I'm the thick as mince.
Yeah, I've got a thick as mince T-shirt now. His partner's calling me thick as mince because I'm thick as mince.
I've got the
best. Inspired a whole new line of merch there.
I think the irony is though, Mark, his dad wouldn't let him run the company because he's thick as shit. So his sister runs it. So the banking and shipping company he's got, an insurance company, his dad wouldn't let him do it. So that's where that thick as mince comes from. He's obviously got an issue about how we were brought up because his dad used to call him thick as shit.
And he's always bringing up people's IQ. When you look at people, if they say anything, he's always bringing up their IQ and this and that. And he's thick as mince.
Can't run the company. So that conversation would go well, wouldn't it?
Matrix coding again, isn't it? Yeah. Dom, jolly.
Yeah, not so jolly.
Dom, not so jolly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You better use it better than Chris.
So you mentioned the Foo Fighters earlier, and I'm saying if my numerology is correct, Foo is 666.
That's right.
So do you think they're fighting for Satanism or against it?
Certainly not against it.
Your friend Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl, yeah. So Dave Grohl is obsessed with the number 666, which would be why he named his group the Foo Fighters. There's only one word in the English language that equates to 666, which is fox. So he chose Foo. And a few years ago, the Foo Fighters took part in a film called Studio 666. And it was set in a deserted mansion, this old dilapidated country house. And the storyline is the band go there to record a new album. And they get taken over by dark forces which are present in the house. Particularly Dave Grohl's character does. And he gets possessed. And then he goes on a rampage and kills his bandmates, including Taylor Hawkins, the drummer, who in the movie gets decapitated by a cymbal thrown by Grohl. And a short while after that movie got released, Taylor Hawkins turns up dead. And we're told it's of some sort of overdose, although it's undisclosed. And he's said to have been clean of drink and drugs for years, but nevertheless dies of an overdose. And Dave Grohl is...
Overdose of mRNA.
MDMA, yeah. Dave Grohl seems very much into occult ritualistic behaviours. In his autobiography, he tells of an occult ritual that he took part in to try and summon up the spirit of John Bonham, the drummer with Led Zeppelin. So Grohl, when he was a drummer with Nirvana, was greatly influenced by Bonham, and he wanted to channel some of his energy. And he goes in great detail in this book into how he performed this ritual, like drew a pentagram on the floor and sprinkled various substances and stuff like that. So he's someone who is greatly interested in the dark occult, like Jimmy Page was, Led Zeppelin and various other musicians. So that will be why he named his band Foo Fighters, because it equates to 666, because he's someone who places value in these things. So not to be trusted, not on our side, nothing that he does will be for the general upliftment of all humankind.
And you can't go to my concert unless you've been jabbed.
That's right.
Masked up and tested.
3-dart finish or no show.
Along with Bruce. Mr. Springsteen, the hero.
The Pfizer Chiefs.
Yeah, could go on.
Who else? Rod Stewart.
Yeah, Rod Stewart. He's a nice guy.
All the greats.
Who else?
You don't hear much of Eric Clapton talking out now, do you?
No, he only did the one video. He just
Yeah.
did the one interview and that was it. Got to wonder if he was warned off, actually, speaking of
I
being
would
warned
say,
off.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say well warned off.
I think he probably stepped outside of his remit by doing that chat.
Somebody probably showed him a wardrobe full of skeletons. Yeah. So
Yeah.
these might fall out of this wardrobe if you keep opening your mouth, Eric.
Yeah. I think it was something like that.
Or is it, what they call him, from Ireland?
Van Morrison.
Van Morrison, yeah.
Yeah. Well, on the chat that we had the other night, I mentioned, or was it the Richard Vogue show? I think it was on the Vogue show that I did
Losing
this
track
week.
now, right?
Yeah. I mentioned that I had a conversation with Van Morrison in 2021 because I was trying to get him to come on my podcast because he was speaking out about all the COVID nonsense and he made a whole album of songs about it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great just to get him on record speaking about this, a recognisable name from the music industry being prepared to speak out. And I got his phone number and I had a 45-minute chat with him and he demonstrated great knowledge of everything that was going on. He knew about Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates' true nature, and I thought, this is great. Got to get this on the record. And I said, will you come on and do a podcast with me? And he said, yeah, speak to my office and they'll arrange it. So he gave me a number to call, called the number, got blocked by a gatekeeper, got knocked all around, sent from pillar to post, all sorts of excuses, fobbed off. And the long and short of it was that he was unavailable to do that interview because a gatekeeper stepped in to block it. So that's what happens. All these people have gatekeepers. Eric Clapton will have a gatekeeper, and he probably wasn't supposed to do that video interview. For whatever reason, it did get through, but they wouldn't have wanted him doing any more interviews, which is why he only did the one and nothing more was heard from him. He would have been warned off.
That would have been an interview of this century anyway, with Van Morrison.
It would have been incredible, yeah.
Yeah, it would.
But he's gone silent now as well. You what? He did 2 albums of that material, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to give him a 10 for speaking out in the first place. We're under so much pressure.
Exactly, when so few others did.
Yeah.
But as I've said many times, when Right Said Fred become the freedom fighters for a generation, something has gone desperately wrong with the music industry.
They were Chris's heroes. He likes vests.
You start slagging off them, lad.
It's where you got your whole look from, isn't it, you two?
Yeah.
The vest's the head.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Apart from Columbo.
Hi. You probably get it worse than me, but we've all experienced when you try and have a conversation with inverted commas normie about the controllers, they will say, but who are they and why would they do it? You always get that response. And when you say Nephilim, clown, bloodline, apocalypse, adrenochrome drinking, devil clones, they think you're mental. So how do you answer that type of response without immediately wanting to throw a headbutt? Which is how I find myself angry just even saying it now. So how do you handle that particular question, which is, who are they and why would they do it?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I don't think we have.
Don't headbutt me.
I don't think we have it harder than you guys because nobody is saying we're nuts here, or who are they? But it were a lot harder before we had a podcast. To be honest, we're talking to your neighbours or people around you about everything. Really, people can't even notice chemtrails, and you're thinking, well, you can't even notice the clouds have changed. They're coming up with new names. Surely these names have been around for thousands of years or whatever, that shape of cloud. They're coming up with 15 new clouds or something like that. Like, what? And people can't even see them now. And I've got a geography teacher living next door to me, so you can imagine conversations I have. Fucking hell. About global climate warming change. She's, I must warn you, I'm a geography teacher. Oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah. I'm not the person you need to talk to then, really, am I? No. But they still come and ask you health advice. Weird, that. When the family's dropping and stuff like that. But it is difficult. Like I said earlier, I don't go out my way now to even try to change or convince people. I think that's the mindset, really. Just drop little nuances in there. Because if they can't see that the whole system's rigged where we are at the point we're at now, they're never going to see it. It's so overt, the attack on the state now to their own populations around the Western world. If they can't see that, then there's no hope for them, sadly.
I think in many ways we have it easier doing podcasts than
I agree, yeah.
Guys out there, folk out there having everyday conversations. Yeah, because we can just say our piece on a podcast, put the information across and leave it with the audience, whereas I have great respect for people that take the time and trouble to have conversations with normies and actually have the patience to see that conversation through, because I wouldn't have the patience for that myself. So it's much harder, I think, when you're out there in the trenches having those one-on-one conversations.
I do think, though, most people realise something strange is going on. When I have conversations with people around, say, a football pitch when we're humans playing football or something, they do realise. I mean, I had a conversation 3 years ago with a guy around a football, rugby actually, and he said, "What do you do?" Oh, fucking hell.
Here we go.
Here we go. I said, "Do you really want to know?" I said, "We've got a podcast." Right. What do you talk about? Bollocks. Right. Where do I start? I said, "Well, 2020 was nonsense." Yeah. I said, "Now I look back." He said, "Yeah, we shouldn't have had those jabs." I said, "Yeah, the whole thing went into detail with him. You were listening. Yeah, I only had it so whatever, could carry on working, go on holiday, whatever." Poor guy died 2 weeks ago. 51-year-old. 3 kids. You know? These are the conversations you're having now with people, you know, over and over again. They're paying the price, these people, and then salt of the earth people, nice people, lovely people, most of them. As much grief as they gave us in 2020, they are salt of the earth people. They trusted the government, didn't they? But that's just one subject, isn't it? I don't think it's answered your question, really. But I don't think there is an easy way, because you've got to look at their mindset who you're telling. It terrifies people. It terrifies them. To think that the people that they think are looking after them are out to kill them.
Well, there's 3 responses I used to give in the early days when people would be disbelieving of the stuff I was trying to tell them. One is to say, imagine that you yourself were a satanic psychopath, just for a moment, you know, suspend all disbelief and imagine that you're one of these individuals. Would you want to control absolutely every aspect of organised society, mainstream media, banking, finance, entertainment, music? Would you want to do that? Is that something that would be in your arsenal, your toolbox? And most people would have to agree that, well, yes, if I was trying to dominate and enslave people, I would want to control these institutions. Okay, so that's number one. Secondly, if there were a plot to enslave you and your family, would you want to know about it? Who's going to say no to that? If people are honest, they're going to say, well, yes, of course I would want to know. In which case you say, well, here I am telling you. And the third is to say, I know you don't believe that all this stuff could be true, and you're very doubtful, but you have children. Can you afford to take the chance? And just leave those thoughts with them. And I used to find those quite effective in the early days.
It's difficult, though. It's difficult. I don't think you should go out your way to try and change people's minds. That's my view. I used to do. Try and be an evangelist, but it's difficult, isn't it? You end up stressing yourself out. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
evangelism process.
Yeah, the evangelism process.
Yeah, we've all done it.
The preacher man.
Pity anyone sitting next to me on a train 15 years ago. They were getting it.
Fall asleep.
Anyone else got any question?
A question for Mark. What's your view on the Stereophonics?
If they're a favourite band and you're hoping I won't completely trash them, you are in luck because I don't know much about them. Only really... no, I don't know much about them. They're not a band I ever really listened to, and they're not one I've studied, so I think you're off the hook there.
They just made one album? No. I'm on about, I'm thinking that other one.
Those songs are recognisable when you hear them. You probably wouldn't.
This is all about stereo MCs.
I'm thinking of that one. Make sure you're connected.
Stereo MCs, yeah.
Yeah, stereo MCs, yeah.
There is
anyway,
bands,
it's not them.
There is bands. We were talking about like the acid jazz movement in the early 90s, and some of those, you know, it's like they were going to stardom, and they just kind of, like Incognito, for instance. No one really knows them. You know, I've seen them live.
Do you know why?
Why?
I think they held the mic. I think they held the mic away from the mouth too much. They couldn't hear them.
Oh, they had it too close, like you. Touche, motherfucker.
I've got a story about Bluey from Incognito in my book, actually.
Have you really?
Yeah, you might not want to read it.
Go on, tell me out. Go on. Just give us a brief.
So
brief synopsis.
Bluey, what's his
He's
name?
called Bluey as well.
Jean-Paul Monic or something, his real name.
Is he the main guy?
Yeah.
The guy.
His grandmother, I think it is, maternal grandmother, was the one-time head of state of Mauritius. Right. So politics, establishment, that's who Bluey is. So, yeah, sorry about that.
To be honest, I saw him live and he was a bit of a prick. Because all they were talking about is how long they've been going, and you're thinking, just sing the songs, man.
He did a jingle for me on my radio show about 30 years ago.
All right.
And I returned the favour by exposing him in my book.
Anyone else?
This is for you, Mark. Has any of these celebrities contacted you not very happy?
No, but I've had plenty of celebrities contact me with supportive messages and saying that I'm absolutely on track with it all. There's some who probably wouldn't want to be named, but I've had Brian Harvey of East 17 reach out to me. Mike Stock of Stock Aitken Waterman. I've been to his studio and he's shared some stuff with me, and he said that he's absolutely on board with what I say. The aforementioned Van Morrison, people like Danny Rampling, Baby D, Right Said Fred, a few others. I've not been contacted by anyone saying, how dare you, who the hell are you, how dare you say this stuff. So maybe they feel that if they did protest in that way, it would kind of reinforce what I was saying in the first place. But no, nobody disgruntled, not openly anyway.
Bet that were an interesting call with Van Morrison, though, wasn't it?
It was, and I wish I'd recorded it, but I didn't.
Sorry, anyone else?
Thank you. This is a question for Mark. It's on behalf of my son. He's 25 years old. He's an aspiring musician, songwriter, writing music, original music with his own band. Really wants to make a career of it. In your opinion, do you think it is possible to make a success of it in the music business without being, signing your soul away, basically, and succumbing to the things that you've spoken about?
I certainly think it's possible to make a decent living and maintain some artistic integrity and get your music out there and get your message out there, there are levels to the industry. So at the very entry level to it, I think it's quite possible for artists and bands to thrive on their own terms. If you're looking to become a household name, you're looking to sign to a major record label, there's going to be a certain amount of compromise that's going to be necessary at that point. But if you're happy enough putting out your own music and doing everything as independently as you can, I think you can make a reasonable enough living out of it. You can pay your bills, you can get by, and you can have a clear conscience that you've not sold out and you're making the kind of music that you want. So I think you just have to be wary of any deals that come along that appear to be too good to be true. Because if they appear to be, they are, and they're the ones to be avoided. But stay below a certain threshold, a certain level, and I think you can do okay for yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right. When is that due? Sounds like a future podcast guest. Yeah. Sounds good. Anyone that hates Simon Cowell can't be all bad.
The thing is about the deal as well, because my son's doing music like him, is that's why they get him young, innit? Because they want in fame. You don't necessarily have to be famous to be a successful musician. You can be a successful musician in your own right, sure. That's what I keep trying to tell myself. But he's 30 and probably past it, because he's too old. They've got a bit of wisdom on him. So they probably won't be able to get him with that golden pot to sign his soul over. Anyone else? Just as a side note, this is where this area is where me and Dom grew up, and just behind there, down in that valley. Is that where out then, in that direction? I don't know if you've heard me talk about when I saw a UFO. It was just down there. A massive UFO. Just me and my mates saw it, just down in that valley. We were sledging down in that valley, and it came over and parked above us. Yeah. I can say that to you a lot. You see, no one thinks I'm fucking nuts, do they?
It was over the motorway, weren't it?
You what?
Was it near the motorway?
Yeah, it was just down that valley there.
Yeah, over the back of the motorway.
I'm Mulehouse Lane.
Yeah. Well, early 80s.
Early 80s, yeah.
Whatever UFOs are.
Yeah, wherever they are. There was me and 5 of my mates, we definitely saw it. We saw some lights in the...
There's only one of them can recollect it.
Me?
No, Spider, yeah. But he only recollected it when you mentioned it to him. It sort of like triggered him to remember it.
We were sat sledging down the banking down there, and was with my I think the cousin was there, Shitton was there, and we were just looking in the distance. We saw these orange lights whizzing around. My cousin started telling us about UFOs. I didn't really know anything about them, so we all started getting scared. As we're going up the banking to come back to the village, this thing just appeared behind us, took up the big circle in the sky like that. And then the next thing, we were just lying in the snow, and the thing's going over that way. Things going over that way. Whatever that was. But I was the only one who remembered it until, like Dom says, a mutual mate of ours, we reminded him. And then he recalled it years later. But, it's junior school, so I'm guessing 12, 10, 1984.
Yeah, I put it to about December 1984.
Right.
So
I was born 11. Yeah, around that age. So the thing is, the little details I remember was running home, telling my mum and dad, because she had some mates around, and all taking the piss out of me. Going to school and telling my mate, and him saying, like kids start exaggerating. Yeah, when I saw you run earlier, I knew you were running faster. So just coming up with shit like that. Right, I was thinking that's bullshit. And then And then I started to draw it. I was drawing it.
Are you sure you didn't say camper?
I was drawing it with my cousin, and he started drawing this thing with guns and stuff on it. And I'm thinking, and he was there, and I'm thinking, he doesn't fucking remember. Or he's just making it up. He started drawing like this thing, and I'm like, it didn't look like that. Which is weird. Anyway, just thought I'd point out. So if you go to that, where the helicopter pad is, it's over there. It was quite a hot spot for UFOs around in the 80s, wasn't it? Yeah. Any more questions? Anything to do with anything weird? What about synchronicity? You know, got a weird synchronicity. You what?
Wrap it up.
We wrap it up then?
Yeah. I think Stuart wants to say something about something, dear Stuart. Yeah.
So we wrap it up then?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a joke, Stuart.
Boom, boom.
Okay. All right, yeah.
All right, Stuart. All right. No.
So was Columbo's eye false or no? Right. I put some of these around these pink pamphlets. I'm part of a Stand in the Park group over at Grimsby. I'm going to say we're very proactive, boards, everything else. I'm sure there's quite a few of you who get involved in Stand in the Park, or hopefully you do. We try and be community based, but every now and then we just dip our toes into the water. We've put this pamphlet out. The guys back here are responsible for it, so well done to them. If you could all possibly spend a few minutes having a look at it. There is also a Facebook group you can look into. This is a fledgling thing. We're really determined about this digital ID, that it mustn't under any circumstances happen. But anyway, if you could have a look, maybe join the group, maybe comment on it, and watch this space, and I'm sure more will follow. And that was it. Thanks for the lads here. A brilliant day. Thank you.
Go on, Chris.
Just one thing. I was just going to say, please take one of these flyers because I had a load printed out for you. Then after today, they're totally useless because it's got us 3 Muppets on it. Us 2 Muppets, sorry, Mike.
Chris is going to bust a freestyle now. You spit some rhymes.
What you say, Stuart?
What are you doing next?
In what way?
Regards.
Going to the bar.
What, tonight?
I'm not asking you out.
You haven't seen me in a negligee.
Yeah, what's your next gig?
All right, we're back here with John Hamer in July 5th, and then London. 27th. Yeah, Mark's on a perpetual British tour, maybe world tour.
Never ends, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need a tap to come and see me either.
Yeah. We don't do many. Yeah. So yeah, been getting nagged to do one down south. It's taken Chris 2 years to sort it out.
Well, I got a response from the one in London, but any in Cambridge, well, I put the link to Sheep Farm and they kind of don't get back to me.
Yeah. East Coast, you see. East Coast, West Coast. Yeah.
Yes, I keep coming to Mablethorpe, but these two won't come.
See, I knew that was a little dig when you said that. What are you planning on doing next?
Yeah, I know. He's way in. He emails me about 10 times a month. He's my stalker.
I do, yeah. It's just difficult because I'm down there and he's up here. But I live like 3 hours away. And you? Yes. Oh yeah, there's a Matt Landman thing coming up, isn't there?
I'll be there, yeah. Yep.
Is that the 21st of June? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, who's travelled the furthest? Okay, yeah, good question, Stuart.
I'll buy him a pie.
Yeah. Who's travelled the furthest? You haven't travelled far. You've travelled from Blue and Golka.
Ireland. Can't get any further than Ireland, can you? Ireland.
Yeah. Ireland wins. Ireland via Scotland.
Cambridge, 3 hours.
So you.
Weirdly, Dom only lives 5 minutes away. Isn't that weird?
Strange, isn't it?
Yeah. What a coincidence.
Look how organised it is. Look how organised it is. Limited corduroy to one person. No, two. Sorry. Yeah.
You got corduroy?
Yeah.
Good girl.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. It's good to see familiar faces now, I suppose. Meet new people like Sean. Not met Sean before, and other people who have not met before. And obviously, I suppose over the years we do get to know each other, don't we? Which is good. Remember meeting Jeff? Came to see you in St Anne's. Met Jeff in toilets. Yeah, that's right.
Not every cloud has a silver lining.
No, not every cloud has a silver lining. Yeah, so, okay. Thank you for... Anybody coming in July? All right, same people. Well, we're doing the same talk. Yeah, okay. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
So try and get people to go back. Cheers, buddy. Excuse me. Just one more thing. We're live on. We're live on Instagram. Can we have a bar from everyone? That had a healing resonance.
You lot need to grow up.